The story began with a knight in shining armor declaring that there was only one person he could absolutely never forgive, a man named Zeke. The dramatic scene was actually taking place inside an otome game that a boy was playing on his phone. Zeke merely scoffed in disdain, dismissing the knight's forgiveness as meaningless. He declared that everyone present would be slaughtered where they stood and that he would kill every last one of them. Watching the intense scene unfold on the screen, the boy groaned in frustration, finding Zeke as infuriating as ever. With renewed determination, he decided to finish the final battle. He rapidly pressed the buttons on his controller, unleashing attack after attack against the villain until he finally defeated him. The boy immediately cheered in triumph, believing that he had finally completed everything. Before he could finish the thought, however, he suddenly fainted and collapsed onto the floor. At that moment, a loading screen appeared on his game. When the boy opened his eyes moments later, he found himself in an unfamiliar place. He wondered where he was. He then realized that his hands were moving on their own, slicing meat. A man sitting across from him questioned why he was spacing out and reminded him that time was not something that could be bought back with gold. The woman beside him added that he was already 12 years old and could not keep acting like a child forever. As the boy stared at their faces, he felt that both of them seemed familiar. The woman then called him Zeke. Hearing that name, he froze in shock. Looking at his reflection in a wineglass, he slowly realized that he had become the very villain from the game he had just been playing. He had become Zeke Lagias. The game was the widely popular RPG Wish Soul, famous for its incredibly deep story and highly satisfying combat. Not only the main hero but every character was filled with personality and charm. Among them all, however, the one with the worst reputation was the final boss, the embodiment of evil, Zeke Lagias. He had attacked the protagonist's family, kidnapped the heroine, twisted the Night Order into his personal army, obliterated an entire town along with everyone living in it, and committed countless other atrocities. Zeke was a monster, a cruel and irredeemable fiend, and that was who the boy had become. The boy, now in Zeke's body, wondered if this was reincarnation. His body moved naturally, as though it had always been his own. Absent-mindedly, he touched a glass, causing it to fall to the floor and shatter into pieces. He quickly turned his head and noticed the maid's hesitation. He intended to apologize, but instead he harshly demanded to know why she was wasting time. Shocked by his own words, he found himself continuing to berate the maid, ordering her to clean up the mess immediately, warning her not to embarrass their master, and referring to the maids as worthless servants. Deep down, he could hardly believe it. He had genuinely meant to apologize, yet only insults had come out. He then recalled that this vicious attitude was exactly how the original Zeke behaved. Realizing that, he wondered if, in this world, any words or actions that did not match the original Zeke were being forcibly corrected. Moments later, alone in his room, Zeke stared at his reflection in the mirror, leaving no doubt that the body he now possessed truly belonged to Zeke Lagias. He had already tried resisting several times, yet he could only act like the villain against his own will. It seemed that the world itself was forcing him to follow the exact life path of Zeke Lagias. No matter which route the story took in the game, Zeke always encountered the protagonist and always met his end at the protagonist's hands. If things continued this way, he too was destined to be killed by the hero. Suddenly, an idea struck him. If Zeke eventually became strong enough to serve as the final boss, then there was a chance he could actually defeat the protagonist. With that decision made, he thought it was unfortunate for the hero, as all he needed now was practice. However, reality proved far more difficult than expected. Relieved that no one was around to witness it, he inwardly lamented how pathetic he was. He realized that actually swinging a sword with his own body was completely different from simply pressing buttons in a game. Nearby, the maids quietly whispered among themselves, wondering if Master Zeke had suddenly decided to learn swordsmanship before concluding that no one could ever understand the whims of the nobility. Meanwhile, in the library, Zeke examined a collection of documents while searching for the best candidate to become his instructor. At that moment, one familiar name caught his attention: Blink Hartmann. He remembered that Blink had once served as a regiment commander in the Night Order, while everyone else on the list was essentially worthless. If he could not stop acting like the villain before meeting the protagonist, then his only choice was to become stronger and survive. To accomplish that, he needed training from the former knight Blink. The following day, the butler announced that the man had arrived. Without wasting a moment, Zeke permitted him to speak and allowed him to raise his head. Blink Hartmann introduced himself as summoned and explained that the offer to serve as Lord Zeke's personal instructor was an honor. However, circumstances prevented him from accepting the request. Hearing this, Zeke was surprised. Blink explained that about a year earlier, his son had fallen gravely ill, prompting him to devote himself entirely to caring for him. Unfortunately, his son's recovery had been slow. He wished only for more time with his son, which was why he had returned from the royal capital. Upon hearing this, Zeke finally understood why Blink had left the Night Order. Blink continued, explaining that a position so close to home with short working hours had seemed like a blessing, but his son's condition had suddenly worsened. Zeke immediately questioned whether money could not solve the problem. Blink explained that they had naturally consulted numerous physicians, yet his son continued to grow weaker by the day. The pain had become so severe that he could no longer even move. Zeke ordered him to explain every detail. Blink fell silent for a moment before describing how his son had been bedridden for about a year. Although he had still been able to eat and hold conversations during that time, his condition had rapidly deteriorated just a few days earlier. Now he could not keep any food down, and even breathing appeared agonizing. After hearing the explanation, Zeke immediately concluded that the antidote required the venom gland of a basilisk. Blink reacted in shock at the mention of the legendary poison dragon, then hesitated, believing that attempting to hunt such a creature was far too dangerous. Zeke challenged that hesitation, questioning whether Blink truly believed he had the luxury of choosing another option. He reminded Blink that his son was bedridden, that even the slightest movement caused unbearable agony, and that the situation was critically urgent. Blink fell silent. Zeke continued, pointing out that if they failed, Blink's son would die, but if Blink did nothing, his son would die regardless. It was nothing more than a gamble. He then forced Blink to make his choice and asked whether he truly wanted to change his son's cruel fate. Blink stared at him in shock before closing his eyes and gathering his resolve. He then knelt on the floor and begged Zeke to save his son. Seeing this, Zeke smirked and instructed Blink to meet at the designated location in 3 days. Afterward, at the Torque Mountains, Blink followed behind Zeke and asked when the soldiers were expected to arrive. Zeke responded by mocking the question, making it clear that he had no intention of wasting valuable soldiers for the sake of Blink's child. Inwardly, he admitted that the real reason was that his miserly parents would not lend him any soldiers, but the outcome was the same. Blink reacted in shock, having assumed that Zeke had been assembling troops only days earlier. Zeke dismissed the assumption as nothing more than Blink's own wishful thinking. Blink hesitated, realizing that facing a basilisk with only the two of them was utter madness. Zeke glanced at him and warned him not to underestimate him, insisting that he would never have come all this way without an ace up his sleeve. Hearing that, Blink gasped in surprise, convinced that Zeke truly had a plan. Inwardly, Zeke affirmed that he did indeed have one. He had also figured out how he was going to survive in this cursed world. By using the game knowledge that only a player possessed, he intended to defy his destiny. Meanwhile, deep within the mountains, countless dead bodies lay scattered across the ground. Inside a dark cave rested a terrifying basilisk. In the middle of the forest, a group of slimes gathered and attacked Zeke, but before they could even touch him, he defeated them in an instant. Watching this, Blink encouraged him to keep it up and continue like that. Inwardly, Zeke noted that having a good teacher truly made a difference. Thanks to Blink's coaching, his form had improved tremendously. Just then, Zeke's train of thought was interrupted when Blink warned him of a monster behind him. Zeke immediately turned around and swung his sword at the approaching slimes, defeating them effortlessly. Blink stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Zeke smirked to himself, satisfied that he had successfully executed the basic combo, cross/slash. Amazed, Blink recognized Zeke's incredible talent, realizing that after only a handful of training sessions, he had already reached such a level. Even so, Zeke was still nowhere near ready to fight a basilisk. Later that night, Blink sat quietly, troubled by his thoughts. He wondered whether he could truly place his trust in Lord Zeke. Zeke certainly did not seem like an ordinary child, and Blink could clearly sense his natural talent with the sword. Even so, he could not understand what Zeke was thinking. Throughout the day, the young lord had repeatedly slipped away on his own, leaving Blink wondering what he had been doing. He also questioned whether the story about the special antidote for magic sclerosis was even true. Lord Zeke was an arrogant noble infamous for oppressing commoners, despising everyone, and being the eldest son of the notorious Lagia's family. At that moment, Zeke returned, causing Blink to snap out of his thoughts. He immediately questioned where Zeke had disappeared to. Zeke simply explained that he had been taking care of something before ordering Blink to prepare himself. Confused, Blink wondered what he needed to prepare for. A deafening roar suddenly echoed throughout the forest. Blink gasped, recognizing the sound as that of a basilisk. He was bewildered because its lair should have been much farther ahead. Zeke explained that he had left behind incense designed to lure the basilisk to their location. Blink was stunned as he realized that the campfire itself had been the incense. He could not understand why Zeke would do something so reckless. Zeke dismissed the concern, pointing out that walking directly into the monster's den would have been far more dangerous. Blink reluctantly acknowledged that this was true. At that instant, the sound of crushing footsteps rapidly approached, and moments later, the basilisk burst from the ground. Without hesitation, Blink stepped forward, intending to handle the monster himself while keeping Lord Zeke behind him. However, Zeke ordered Blink to stay where he was and not move from his upwind position. Blink was left speechless. Ignoring his reaction, Zeke calmly began counting down from 3. The moment the countdown ended, a massive explosion erupted directly beneath the basilisk. Blink stared in shock before Zeke immediately explained that it was a magic mine, a set-trap magic item that automatically detonated when enough pressure was applied. Zeke smirked, remarking that although it was a cheap trinket, it was more than sufficient for cannon fodder like the basilisk. Blink could hardly believe that Zeke had prepared everything himself all this time. He could not understand how Zeke had known the basilisk would pass through that exact spot. Zeke's smirk only widened as he inwardly reflected that he had slaughtered countless basilisks in the game. He knew the terrain and every predictable movement of the creature like the back of his hand. As the thick dust dissipated, the heavily wounded basilisk struggled back onto its feet, blood continuing to gush from its wounds. Zeke instructed Blink to stay out of his way, make himself useful, and watch the perimeter. Blink hesitated for a moment but concluded that although he was clearly superior in raw combat ability, Lord Zeke's knowledge of the basilisk was undeniably leagues ahead of his own. He wondered if the young lord truly had some kind of hidden strategy. Blink obeyed the order, resolving to intervene only if the situation became an emergency. Before long, the basilisk charged at Zeke and launched an attack, but Zeke dodged it with ease. He scoffed inwardly, finding the creature's attacks as predictable as ever. Its attack patterns had not changed in the slightest, making the fight painfully boring. Excitement soon spread across his face as he decided it was finally showtime. Zeke ordered Blink to get back and warned him not to be foolish enough to remain downwind. Blink was confused by the warning, but the moment the basilisk opened its mouth, he immediately understood. The monster was about to unleash its poisonous breath. Blink called out to Zeke, but as the thick poisonous smoke rapidly spread across the area, Zeke disappeared completely from sight. Unable to see him any longer, Blink shouted his name in panic before freezing in shock. Despair overcame him as he convinced himself that the worst had happened. He blamed himself, believing he should have fought the basilisk instead. Thinking of his son, Luke, he silently apologized for failing him as a father. In the midst of his grief, Blink suddenly noticed something unusual beneath his feet. The ground around him was covered in water. Realizing something was wrong, he quickly turned toward the spot where Zeke had last stood before being engulfed by the poisonous breath. There, completely unharmed, stood Zeke. A massive wall of ice had risen before him, shielding him from the attack. Blink stared in disbelief, realizing it had been magic. He could hardly believe that Zeke had erected such a barrier in the briefest instant. Zeke smirked, inwardly noting that he had never claimed to be incapable of using magic. He recalled that the original Zeke was a naturally gifted mage, allowing him to wield powerful ice magic from the very beginning. Zeke then sharply ordered Blink to remain silent and keep watching. At that moment, the basilisk charged once again. Zeke raised his sword, and in an instant, ice magic spiraled around the blade, gradually encasing it in crystalline frost. Blink could only stare in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. Calmly, Zeke resolved to bring the monster down. The basilisk released another piercing roar and unleashed a second wave of poisonous breath. Zeke remained completely unharmed as he reflected that this was precisely why he had lured the creature into terrain rich with water. In the blink of an eye, he dashed forward and swung his ice-forged sword, cleanly slicing through the basilisk's flesh. At that exact moment, he activated his spell, Icicle Cross. Ice erupted violently from within the basilisk's wound, bursting outward like jagged spears. The monster convulsed and groaned in agony. Blink remained frozen in place, unable to believe what he had just seen. He immediately recognized the technique as the basic cross/combo enhanced with Zeke's signature ice magic and his ultimate finishing move. He also realized that the abundance of water mana in the area was amplifying Zeke's power through the terrain effect, allowing the strategy to work perfectly. Zeke glanced back at Blink, making it clear that from that moment onward, Blink would serve under him. Blink was left speechless before dropping to one knee and pledging his absolute obedience. Inwardly, he could only wonder who this boy truly was. Meanwhile, deep within the mountains, chaos spread as monsters attacked. Panic swept through the area as people fled in terror while others collapsed helplessly on the ground, unable to move. One man, barely conscious, raised a trembling finger and pointed toward a small girl in the distance. With his remaining strength, he attributed everything to her, calling her a tree, the cursed and abominable child. Back at the mansion, Zeke stood at the training ground. Unsheathing his sword, he sliced a block of ice cleanly in half. A few days earlier, after the basilisk hunt, they had returned to town, where the people were stunned by the sight of a real basilisk. They marveled that it had been frozen solid, including its organs, and wondered what kind of power could accomplish such a feat. Some remarked that nothing like it had ever happened in the guild's history, while others assumed that the knight standing nearby had been responsible. Blink, however, gestured toward Zeke and identified him instead. The man immediately recognized Zeke and was left speechless. Nearby, another group whispered among themselves, recognizing him as the Legia's demon child. They could hardly believe that Lord Zeke had accomplished such a feat elsewhere. Others looked upon him with disdain, dismissing the hunt as nothing more than disgusting animal cruelty and poaching for profit. Despite hearing all of it, Zeke remained calm. Inwardly, he found it pathetic how quickly people changed their opinions. Still, he expected nothing else given his terrible reputation. Making excuses would accomplish nothing, as people would only twist whatever he said or did. Even so, he had obtained the ingredients needed for the cure. Back in the present, Blink called out to him, no longer showing any trace of the despair he once carried. He praised Zeke's remarkable progress. Hiding his embarrassment, Zeke harshly remarked that the faster he improved, the sooner Blink would become unnecessary. Blink simply accepted the remark with a smile, finding it something to look forward to. He also mentioned that, thanks to Lord Zeke, his son Luke was steadily recovering. Zeke brusquely dismissed the comment. Inwardly, he noted that Blink's opinion of him seemed to be skyrocketing. Still, everything was proceeding according to plan. All he had to do was maintain the pace and avoid his death flag. Just then, a commotion erupted nearby. Zeke turned toward the gate, wondering what all the noise was about. A man desperately pleaded for Zeke's help. Inwardly, Zeke wondered what the matter was this time. Not long afterward, 2 men were escorted inside. Lord Legias repeated that the matter concerned Alhai village in the Northern Plains, while the Marchioness criticized the direct appeal as highly improper for bypassing the official channels. The 2 men immediately knelt and begged for forgiveness before explaining that their village was under attack by magical beasts and desperately needed reinforcements. Hearing this, Zeke was surprised to learn that magical beasts were involved. The men explained that the attackers were a pack of breeze weasels. Zeke recalled that breeze weasels were individually small and weak, but they hunted in coordinated packs and wielded wind magic. Each attack was unimpressive on its own, yet together, especially across the open plains, they became a serious threat. Lord Legias angrily rejected the request, declaring that he would not waste resources on a poor village like Alhai. He pointed out that the village paid almost no taxes and ordered them to stop wasting his time and deal with the problem themselves. Hearing this, Zeke inwardly remarked with sarcasm that the stereotypical scumbag Lord Legias was his own relative. He then considered the Northern Plains, recalling that they had never even appeared in the game. Ignoring the situation should not cause any problems. The 2 men rose to their feet with tears streaming down their faces and desperately begged for someone to save their village, insisting they could not return home like this. Seeing them, Zeke paused for a moment before suddenly ordering them to be quiet, startling both men. Zeke then turned toward his parents and declared that he would go. He reasoned that taking part in a subjugation at his age would greatly improve his reputation. As for a mere pack of breeze weasels, he intended to turn their pelts into matching scarves for the 2 men. Hearing this, the Marchioness looked at her son with pride. Lord Legias remarked that Zeke was finally showing some backbone as the heir to the Legia's name. Pleased with the decision, he agreed to provide him with a handful of soldiers. However, he instructed Zeke to abandon the village and return immediately if the situation became dangerous. Zeke accepted the order without hesitation. Meanwhile, the 2 men who had come to seek help looked visibly upset after hearing those remarks. Inwardly, Zeke noted that even though he was trying to do the right thing, his approval rating continued to plummet. Shortly afterward, they departed for the Northern Plains. While riding in the carriage, Zeke questioned Blink about why his son was accompanying them. The boy cheerfully introduced himself as Luke and explained that it was all thanks to Zeke that he was able to stand on his feet again. He wished to prove his worth during this mission. Overwhelmed by the boy's enthusiasm, Zeke inwardly found there to be something suspicious about him. Luke insisted that Zeke had to be joking. Zeke continued criticizing him, questioning what use a scrawny little runt like him could possibly be. Luke apologized but maintained that he was quite resourceful and assured Zeke that he would be helpful. At that moment, Blink bowed his head and pleaded with Zeke to allow Luke to serve as his attendant during the trip. Luke then revealed that he aspired to become a knight someday and vowed to repay the debt he owed to Lord Zeke. Zeke fell silent. Inwardly, he realized that Luke Hartmann had never appeared during any of his playthroughs as the hero. It felt as though reality was gradually drifting further away from the game he remembered. Even so, he concluded that none of it would matter as long as he became strong enough. With a sigh, Zeke finally allowed Luke to do as he pleased. Luke enthusiastically promised not to disappoint him, while Blink smiled and expressed his gratitude to Zeke. As the carriage settled into peaceful silence, Luke quietly observed Zeke. He recalled how his father had described Lord Zeke as an incredible man. At the time, Luke had argued that everyone else, from the soldiers to the common folk, despised the young lord. Blink had simply told him to see for himself, believing that once Luke truly came to know the man, he would understand as well. Remembering those words, Luke resolved to discover for himself who the young lord truly was beneath the rumors. After several hours, they finally arrived at Alhai village and immediately headed to meet the village chief. Blink asked about the reported attack by the breeze weasels, noting that the creatures were normally quite docile. The chief explained that they had suddenly become vicious for reasons no one could understand. At that moment, another man interrupted, insisting that the attacks were the work of the cursed child. He blamed every misfortune that had befallen the village on the girl since the day she was born. The chief quickly tried to silence the furious man, reminding him not to speak that way in front of their guest. The man ignored him and insisted that the chief already knew the truth. He claimed that this was why the girl had been isolated and argued that this was not the first time the beasts had gone mad. According to him, the cursed girl had always been somewhere nearby whenever such incidents occurred. At that moment, Zeke interrupted and asked about the cursed child they had been discussing. With no choice but to explain, the village chief revealed that 12 years earlier, a girl had been born in the village with hair as white as snow. At the time, the villagers had simply found it unusual and thought nothing more of it. However, when she was 5 years old, the village storehouse suddenly burst into flames. No one ever discovered how the fire had started, yet when the flames were extinguished, the girl was found sleeping peacefully in the middle of the ruins without a single burn on her body. The villagers questioned her repeatedly, but she could only say that she did not remember anything. From that day onward, one disaster after another struck the village. Crops withered, wells ran dry, homes collapsed, livestock died without explanation, the weather became increasingly abnormal, and the beasts turned savage. Eventually, even the girl's own parents suddenly collapsed and died at the exact same moment. After hearing the story, Zeke found the matter of the cursed child intriguing. He ordered them to bring the girl to him, reasoning that she would lead them to the site of the attacks. When the villagers hesitated, Zeke questioned what the problem was. Since she had been the only thing left standing after the storehouse fire, she was perfectly suited to serve as their guide. The man immediately led them to the place where the cursed child was imprisoned. Upon arriving, Zeke ordered him to open the door. As the door swung open, the man called the young girl's name, a tree. She looked up in surprise when she saw them. Zeke's eyes widened as he noticed the chain fastened around her leg to prevent her escape. A surge of anger rose within him, and he coldly ordered everyone to leave. The man hesitated, but Zeke shouted again, forcing him to leave immediately. Without another word, Zeke drew his sword and cut through the chain. A tree stared at him in shock. She struggled to speak, but Zeke immediately remarked that she smelled terrible. Her face flushed with embarrassment as she hurriedly apologized, explaining that because she was the cursed child, the villagers would not allow her to use the baths whenever anyone else was present. Zeke questioned why she was apologizing for their stupidity. A tree blamed herself for everything that had happened, insisting that she was cursed. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed that the monsters had become savage because of her and that even her parents had died because of the curse. She pleaded for him to end her life, believing that the villagers were too afraid of the curse to ever do it themselves. Without warning, Zeke cupped her cheeks and ordered her to listen. Addressing her as filth, he declared that he was Zeke Lagias, the undisputed heir to the Lagias domain. He had come there to slaughter beasts, not to concern himself with some insignificant village curse. Such trivial matters meant nothing to the demon child of Lagias. He had no patience for her self-pity. He ordered her to wipe away her tears because she would be guiding him to the site of the attacks. For the moment, that was her only value. A tree was left stunned at being told she would serve as his guide. Before leaving, Zeke smirked inwardly, dismissing the idea that her pathetic curse could possibly affect the demon child of Lagias. He then instructed her to wash the grime from her face and find clothes that did not resemble rags, remarking that the stench was unbearable. After Zeke left, a tree quietly repeated the title, The Demon Child, her heart filled with mixed emotions. Later that night, in the northern plains, the area was overrun with creatures known as breeze weasels. Suddenly, they caught a scent drifting through the air, and their hunger intensified. Outside, the knights were busy loading the wagons. One knight announced that everyone should prepare for the extermination, while another complained about making such a fuss over a few measly breeze weasels, calling the entire matter involving the Lagias demon child pathetic. Hearing those remarks, Luke noticed that the Lagias soldiers suffered from low morale and poor training, and he concluded that the young lord was likely the reason. Both Luke and Blink remained silent until someone suddenly announced that the cursed child was approaching. Everyone was immediately warned not to look the taboo child in the eyes. Luke was taken aback by the mention of a taboo child, and Blink understood it to be nothing more than a backward village superstition, as the villagers believed she was responsible for every misfortune. Shortly afterward, Zeke stepped forward and confirmed that the entire force had assembled. He gestured toward a tree and informed the troops that the brat would guide them into the beast's territory. The knights murmured among themselves, doubting that such a little girl could serve as a guide and suspecting that the young lord intended to use her as bait. Without wasting any time, everyone boarded the wagons and headed toward the beast's territory. During the journey, Zeke fell into deep thought about the cursed girl, a tree. Everyone in the village called her the taboo child, Yet the reasons behind those accusations were almost entirely baseless. The well had dried up because the groundwater path had shifted, the crop failures were caused by continuous cropping, and her parents' deaths had simply been an accident. None of those events had any connection to a tree whatsoever, yet something about the entire situation still did not sit right with him. Just then, a tree pointed out the location where the breeze weasels had attacked. Zeke looked over the area and found it no different from any ordinary plain. Moments later, he felt a sudden gust of wind. Instantly realizing it was wind magic, he immediately ordered everyone to hit the ground. In the next instant, the wagon was sliced cleanly in half, and the horses bolted out of control. Panic spread through the group as Zeke and Blink jumped off the wagon. Zeke berated the knights as pathetic slugs while ordering them to move into battle formation and protect the injured and the non-combatants. The troops obeyed immediately, only to discover that they were completely surrounded. Shock spread among them as they realized the overwhelming number of monsters and questioned how they were supposed to deal with such a massive swarm. Meanwhile, Zeke rushed forward without hesitation, striking down 2 monsters at once. He scolded the others for whining, reminding them that even in such numbers, they were still nothing more than pathetic weasels. After cutting down another monster, Blink encouraged the troops not to falter, pointing out that although there were many monsters, they were weak. The soldiers gradually regained their confidence and joined the battle. As they easily defeated the monsters lunging at them, they realized with relief that the breeze weasels were not particularly tough and that they could eliminate them without much effort. Zeke, however, remained unconvinced. Although the monsters themselves were not strong, something about the situation felt suspicious. Blink called out, having arrived at the same conclusion. Zeke noted that even Blink had noticed it. Blink observed that, for monsters, their movements were unnaturally coordinated. Zeke confirmed that was exactly the problem and added that, combined with their overwhelming numbers, the area might have become a breeding ground. Blink was stunned by the implication. If this was a colony breeding ground, an unnatural domain where swarms of monsters lived and bred together, then it was essentially an overworld dungeon. Cold sweat ran down his face as he realized that if the place had truly become a monster colony, it was far beyond what they could handle. At that moment, something strange happened, and Zeke sensed it immediately. He realized that the flow of mana had changed and was struck by the horrifying possibility of what it meant. Meanwhile, Luke hid behind the wagon with a tree and reassured her that everything would be fine because his father and the soldiers were there. Nearby, the knights continued fighting the monsters without pause. Just then, Zeke warned everyone to watch out for the monster's magic. In the next moment, one of the horses was struck and killed instantly. A tree screamed in horror as tears streamed down her face. She blamed herself for everything, believing it was all her fault because she was the taboo child. She thought she should never have left the shack, never should have broken the chain, never should have believed him, never should have listened, and never should have dared to hope. She saw her hope as foolish and repeatedly apologized while continuing to blame herself. Deep inside, Luke realized that such an enormous number of monsters was far from normal, just as the existence of the cursed child weighed heavily on his mind. All of a sudden, the breeze weasels stopped attacking. The knights were left confused, wondering if the monsters had lost their nerve. Another noticed that they had completely stopped advancing. However, the monsters' auras suddenly began to change. Luke stared in disbelief as he realized that their mana was synchronizing and amplifying together. The breeze weasels surrounding them all opened their mouths simultaneously, and glowing spheres of lightning began to form. Luke's eyes widened as he recognized the spell as the advanced magic, Air Bullet. As the seconds passed, the spheres continued to grow larger. Luke immediately threw himself and a tree to the ground. The following moment, the air bullets were unleashed toward everyone at once. The soldiers braced for the impact, but nothing happened. When a tree opened her eyes, she was astonished to see ice spikes surrounding them, freezing the nearby monsters. Zeke was surprised that common beasts had managed to perform a unison link, but he resolved to teach them exactly who the true prey was in that hunt. Relief washed over the group as everyone stared in shock. One knight wondered if it had been ice magic, while another could hardly believe that Lord Zeke had cast the spell. The men gradually began to celebrate, believing that the attack had wiped out most of the monsters. Their relief was short-lived as the ground suddenly shook violently. The knights wondered if it was an earthquake. At that moment, a massive creature emerged. Zeke recognized it as arriving right on schedule, concluding that, if the usual game system applied, every breeding ground was guaranteed to have a boss monster. The massive monster let out a deafening roar. Zeke had already expected this outcome. A breeding ground where a huge number of magical beasts lived as a colony was exactly the kind of place where a massive boss would appear. The knights began to waver, believing there was no way they could handle an enemy like this, especially if it used the same coordinated attack again. Zeke recalled that the coordinated attack, Unison Link, was a special technique in which multiple users synchronized and amplified their mana to unleash a much stronger attack. He had never imagined that mere beasts could use it. At that moment, the glowing sphere inside the monster's mouth continued to grow larger. The knights panicked as they realized the attack was coming. In the next instant, the air bullet fired like a massive laser beam, crashing straight toward them and shattering the ice walls in an instant. Everyone could only watch in disbelief at the overwhelming impact. Luke was horrified and concluded that, at this rate, their only option was to flee. Completely unfazed by the devastating attack, Zeke dismissed their panic as the behavior of worthless grunts and reminded them of who he was. He was Zeke Lagias, the demon child of Lagias. Even so, Luke still hesitated, recognizing that they were facing a weasel colony breeding ground with its boss, and that the monsters could even use Unison Link. Zeke acknowledged inwardly that the situation was indeed dangerous and not to be underestimated, but he also knew there were still things he could do. Stepping forward without fear, Zeke faced the massive monster head-on. Having seen enough of its display, he took his turn without wasting a single moment. He cast Ice Shot, instantly taking down the monsters that rushed toward him. The knights stared in amazement as they realized he possessed such magic. Seeing the smaller breeze weasels being slaughtered so effortlessly, the massive beast let out a furious roar. A tree immediately realized that the monster had become enraged. Gripping his sword tightly, Zeke resolved to show no mercy in this struggle for survival. At that very instant, he unleashed an enormous icicle lance toward the enemy. The knights were stunned by the massive spear of ice, convinced there was no way for the monster to dodge it, and some believed victory was within reach. Blink, however, realized it would not be enough. The beasts had stopped moving once again and were activating Unison Link. In the very next moment, the massive creature unleashed the advanced wind spell Delta Storm. Before the devastating magic could even reach them, Zeke effortlessly neutralized it. Luke and a tree were both shocked by the feat. Then a tree suddenly realized that the mana had not faded. At that exact moment, Zeke commanded all creation to freeze with Icicle Ray. A freezing gust instantly spread across the battlefield, covering everything in frost. The trees and ground around him froze solid, and before the beasts could escape, their bodies were instantly trapped within thick ice. Silence fell across the battlefield as every single monster stood frozen in place. In the next instant, Zeke swung his blade and shattered the frozen beasts into countless pieces. Luke immediately recognized the technique as a saturation bombardment. Because Unison Link was such a precise technique, it carried an inherent delay before it could be fired again. Zeke had predicted that delay, baited their counter with mid to high-tier spells, and then, the instant they committed to Unison Link, unleashed wide-area annihilation magic. His chilling strategic acumen, magical intuition, and overwhelming talent had all come together in a single decisive attack. This was the true power of the demon child of Lagias. With the battle finished, Zeke turned to everyone, signaled that the show was over, and ordered them to move out. Meanwhile, behind a tree, a man watched the battle in horror. Trembling, he could only regard Zeke as a demon. Afterward, back at the village, the chief and the others bowed before Zeke, expressing that they were truly in his debt. All the villagers offered their deepest thanks. However, some of them quietly whispered among themselves, calling him terrifying and referring to him as the Ice Demon. Hearing their murmurs, Zeke let out a sigh. Although he had saved their village, they still viewed him that way. It was exactly what he would expect from people toward a villain, though he had long since grown accustomed to it. Without responding to the whispers, Zeke announced that they were leaving. A tree quickly ran after him and pleaded for him to forgive the villagers after everything he had done for them. Zeke cut her off, dismissing the mutterings of peasants as beneath his notice. No matter what anyone said, he remained who he was. Without warning, he removed a tree's hood and told her not to look down, but to look forward and continue advancing. After leaving those words behind, he departed, leaving a tree stunned. Meanwhile, Blink overheard several villagers whispering about what the cursed child could possibly be discussing with the Ice Demon. He approached them and warned them to be careful around the girl because she was Lord Zeke's favorite. If they tried anything foolish, the Ice Demon might return for them. Hearing the warning, the men immediately flinched in fear. Closing her eyes, a tree repeated Zeke's words to herself about looking forward. She slowly reached into her pocket, gripped a small knife, and, without hesitation, cut off the hair that had been covering her face. At that moment, she swore that she would surely become just like him. On their way back, inside the carriage, Zeke noticed Luke staring at him. With a cheerful demeanor, Luke patted him on the back and praised him as the future lord. Zeke was caught off guard, though he quickly realized Luke was merely putting on an act. Soon afterward, concern filled Zeke's thoughts as he reflected that he had wasted precious time on an event that had never existed in the game. He wondered how this would affect the main plot. If events continued to follow the game's story too closely, he would die anyway. Regardless of whether this incident had been part of the game or not, his swordsmanship and magic alone were not enough, and his death was practically guaranteed as things stood. What he needed now was real combat experience. Resolving himself, Zeke decided that, whatever it took, he would accumulate experience and become much stronger. Even so, He could not help but wonder what the protagonist, Van, was doing at that very moment. As their carriage traveled onward, it passed a wagon heading in the opposite direction. A man called out that they were almost at the village and ordered the boy to put away that damned sword. The boy regarded the sword as practically his soul, insisting that he was a swordsman and the future hero. That boy was the protagonist of Wish Soul, named Van. A few days after that event, Zeke spent his days training without pause. He recalled that he had once been an ordinary high school student obsessed with the game Wish Soul, only to find himself reincarnated as its main villain, Zeke Lagias. Fated to be killed by the heroes, he was determined to overturn that death flag by becoming as strong as possible. However, his magic had grown so powerful that his swords could no longer withstand it. At that moment, his father approached with exciting news. A dungeon had been discovered within their territory. As dungeons contained ancient weapons and magic items that could not be found on the surface, it was a treasure trove waiting to be claimed. Internally, Zeke was stunned. He immediately realized it was the Lagia's dungeon, the labyrinth explored near the end of the game where the ultimate ice god's sword lay dormant. Excitement filled him as he realized the ice god's sword should be capable of handling his immense magic. It was the key to becoming much stronger. Lord Lagias explained that, despite the inconvenience, Kingdom Protocol required the Royal Survey Team to investigate the dungeon first. Zeke inwardly lamented the typical government red tape. Lord Lagias then informed him that the survey team had just arrived and proceeded to introduce them. The first was the magician, Marx, the second was the knight, Mia, and the last was the sage, Glance. Glance introduced himself as Glance Folt, leader of the survey team, and expressed his pleasure at making their acquaintance. Lord Lagias enthusiastically explained that Glance was highly skilled and was even said to advise the Magicians' Guild. Glance added that Marx and Mia were seasoned professionals, a magician and a knight, and expressed confidence that they would prove invaluable. The moment Zeke heard the name Glance Folt, he was deeply shocked. He immediately remembered that Glance was one of the hero's future party members in the game, a man of integrity known as the Sage. He also remembered that Glance led the first survey team into the Lagia's dungeon, while everyone else on the expedition was wiped out. That tragedy was the prologue event that marked the beginning of the main story, the Lagia's dungeon survey team annihilation incident. Glance ultimately took responsibility for the disaster and disappeared into seclusion, yet House Lagias never stopped blaming the landless Glance for the failed survey. That resentment eventually drove a wedge between Glance and the family, igniting conflict with the heroes later in the story. In other words, this incident was yet another one of Zeke's death flags. Zeke immediately requested permission from his father to join the survey. Glance and the others were surprised, while Zeke merely smirked as he waited for his father's decision. Glance found the enthusiasm encouraging, but pointed out that they were already short on guards and that dungeon expeditions were far too dangerous for a newcomer. Zeke replied that he had expected such an objection, reasoning that without anyone overseeing the expedition, claiming the treasure would become a free-for-all. His remarks caused all three members of the survey team to flinch in disbelief. Zeke continued by stating that, if they denied such concerns, they would have to prove it. He questioned what the real issue was and added that he certainly had no need for an escort. Lord Lagias proudly declared that it seemed his son had awakened to his responsibilities as the future lord. Zeke affirmed that he had, adding that he had already intended to acquire a suitable sword for himself. Without hesitation, Lord Lagias approved the request and instructed the survey team that Zeke would accompany them. Inwardly, Zeke organized his objectives for overcoming these death flags. The first was to claim the Ice God sword. The second was to ensure that the survey team survived. Afterward, the group arrived at the Ansley Forest dungeon within the Lagia's domain. They entered without delay. As he followed behind the others, Zeke ordered them not to make a single move without his explicit permission. Any mistake would cost them their lives. Marx quietly complained to Glance that the insufferable little lordling was a real pain. Glance replied that it was the Lord's order, so they had no choice but to tolerate him. Mia glanced back and noticed Zeke watching them. Shortly afterward, the group reached a dead end. Zeke remarked on how pathetic it was. Ignoring him, Mia summoned a will-o-wisp and directed it to search the surrounding area. Zeke commented that it was merely a simple detection spell and nothing significant. Mia wondered about the structure of the room, and Mark suggested it might be some kind of altar. Glance considered that perhaps the dungeon was not very deep. Just then, Mia noticed Zeke moving toward the wall. As he reached out to touch it, she immediately warned the amateur not to do so because he had no idea what kind of traps might be hidden there. Before she could finish, Zeke touched the wall. A brilliant light shone, and something appeared within the altar. Mia and Marx reacted in shock as they recognized it as a warp zone. Treating the outcome as entirely predictable, Zeke explained that, based on the construction methods, including the walls, he had estimated the dungeon dated back to the late prehistoric civilization. Standard detection magic was therefore useless against devices from that era because they often relied on mechanisms triggered by specific magic wavelength. Calling it basic knowledge, he dismissed the group as amateurs and advised those useless pieces of baggage to stay behind him where they belonged. Without hesitation, Zeke stepped onto the altar. Mia quickly tried to stop him, but he ignored her. Watching this, she gritted her teeth, believing he had only discovered the warp zone through pure luck and now thought highly of himself. Meanwhile, Glance wondered where Zeke Lagias had acquired such knowledge and questioned what kind of person he truly was. Later, Zeke cast Ice Shot with flawless precision, effortlessly activating a mechanism that normally required 3 people to operate simultaneously. The next moment, he arranged a set of stones in their required stacking order without pause. When faced with another trap designed to crush intruders from above, he casually bypassed it. As the others continued following behind him, Marks muttered in disbelief about what was happening. Mia observed that Lord Zeke was moving as though he owned the dungeon and wondered if he had actually been there before, though she immediately rejected the idea as impossible. Glance disagreed with their assumption. He pointed out that Zeke could barely remain on his feet and was clearly burning through his stamina. That was not how someone familiar with the dungeon would appear. More importantly, Glance found Zeke's attitude peculiar. Zeke glanced back at them, criticized them as incompetents, and remarked that it must be nice to stroll along and chat as though they were on a picnic. Glance silently observed that Zeke always took the lead and never lowered his guard, yet deliberately kept everyone at a distance through the way he spoke. Suddenly, a realization struck him, and he began to wonder if his suspicion was correct. As they continued deeper into the dungeon, Zeke could not help but acknowledge how capable the survey team was. Mia, the knight, had not broken her concentration for even a moment and remained constantly prepared for battle. Marks maintained her detection magic continuously without showing the slightest sign of fatigue. Glance's magic flow remained unwavering, and his calm demeanor never faltered. Honestly, Zeke concluded that they probably could have reached this point even without him. The game had never explained how they were wiped out, leaving him unable to understand how experts of their caliber could have fallen. Just then, Marks remarked on how strange it was that they had not encountered a single magical beast. Zeke silently agreed. Even though he had been disarming traps ahead of them, the complete absence of monsters was unnatural. In the game, the dungeon had been filled with powerful enemies. A bad feeling settled over him as he wondered if they had already stepped into a death trap. The moment they entered the next chamber, Zeke froze in shock. His eyes immediately locked onto the ice god's sword. Almost at once, however, his expression changed as he realized something was deeply wrong. Marks suddenly rushed forward after sensing an incredible surge of magical power, convinced they had found a treasure. Zeke reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he cast ice magic to block her path and warned her not to touch it. Mia turned toward him in anger, but Glance quickly stopped her. Narrowing his eyes, Glance concluded that his suspicion had been correct and realized that Lord Zeke had been trying to protect them all along. Mia looked at him in confusion, unable to understand what he meant. Before anyone could respond, violent lightning suddenly crackled around the ice god's sword. The entire chamber trembled, and the entrance behind them was abruptly sealed shut. Zeke cursed under his breath. At that moment, the altar erupted with blinding light. Everyone stood in stunned silence as something began to take shape within it. In the next instant, a massive creature emerged. Everyone gasped in shock at the sight of the archdemon. Glance's eyes widened as he recognized it as a legendary ancient magical species. He could hardly believe such a creature truly existed. Mia immediately instructed everyone to proceed with caution. Zeke ignored her and launched an icicle lance at the archdemon. Mia reacted in alarm as he acted on his own. As the attack struck, thick smoke spread through the chamber. Inwardly, Zeke dismissed the idea of fighting cautiously. Waiting around served no purpose. A first strike was reconnaissance, a way to gauge the enemy's capabilities. The archdemon effortlessly nullified the icicle lance. Marks was stunned that it had emerged completely unharmed. Zeke immediately wondered if it possessed some kind of anti-magic shield. He recalled that an archdemon was rare even in the game. It was an event-exclusive monster whose attack patterns changed every time it appeared. There was no doubt in his mind that this was the very creature responsible for wiping out the original survey team. At that moment, the archdemon slammed its fist into the ground. The entire chamber shook as a powerful shockwave spread outward. In the next instant, it lunged directly at Marks. Before anyone could react, it struck her in midair and sent her flying into the stone wall. Marks cried out in pain as she collapsed, and Mia immediately turned her attention to her. Zeke was momentarily stunned that Marks had been taken out with a single blow. Believing magic would not work, Mia stepped forward to attack instead. Although Glance tried to stop her, she pressed on and unleashed her peerless sword dance against the archdemon. She attempted to pierce its barrier, but the demon barely moved. With a casual motion, it struck her aside and slammed her back into the ground. Zeke stared in disbelief as he realized the demon could also block physical attack. He quickly looked toward Marks, who struggled back to her feet. Gritting her teeth, she raised her hand and called upon Ignis, the king of flames, ordering the spirit to burn the enemy. A blazing spirit manifested before them. Hope surged through Zeke as he recognized the flame's spirit king. It was advanced spirit magic, and because it possessed a different attribute from his own ice magic, he believed it might succeed. However, the archdemon responded immediately. A third barrier appeared and completely negated the spirit's flames. A wave of shock spread through the group. Glance stepped forward, tightening his grip on his staff. His arm suddenly bulged before he raised the weapon high and unleashed evil shattering flash, throwing the staff with all his strength. Mia immediately recognized it as the sage's signature technique, a special attack imbued with every elemental attribute. Hearing that, Zeke became convinced the attack would finally succeed. The moment the staff struck its target, a massive explosion erupted, and thick smoke engulfed the chamber. Mia believed it had worked, but Zeke immediately declared that the archdemon was completely unharmed. Everyone stared in disbelief. At last, Zeke understood the demon's ability. This time, it possessed 4 shields capable of nullifying every form of attack, whether physical or magical. Before they could defeat it, those shields had to be broken. The archdemon then opened its mouth wide. Realizing what was coming, Zeke immediately warned everyone that a powerful attack was about to be unleashed. Without hesitation, the group erected their defenses with barrier, ice wall, and shield. The archdemon fired its attack, and although everyone resisted with all their strength, the overwhelming impact blasted them backward. Zeke crashed onto the ground, realizing the attack's power was overwhelming. Before he could recover, the archdemon prepared to unleash another attack. Zeke's eyes widened in shock. There was no way they could dodge the incoming attack. At that very moment, however, Marks, Glance, and Mia stepped forward without hesitation, placing themselves firmly in front of him. Together, they raised their barriers and endured the full force of the archdemon's assault, desperately resisting its overwhelming power. Zeke was stunned. He regarded them as fools and demanded to know what they were doing. Despite her heavy injuries, Mia retorted that she could hardly call herself a knight if she could not even protect one brat. Glance called out to Zeke, mentioning that he had a grandson about the same age as him. He handed Zeke a gem and instructed him to take it and escape. Seeing Zeke's confusion, Glance explained that the gem was an ancient relic known as a transfer orb. It could warp its user anywhere within its effective range. Unfortunately, they had only one, making it enough to save a single person. Zeke protested in disbelief. He could not accept the idea of turning his back on them and fleeing alone. Breathing heavily, Marks interrupted him and insisted that someone had to survive to bring back the information. Otherwise, the entire disaster would have been for nothing. Zeke fell silent. He could see that Marks and Mia were gravely wounded and already exhausted. Inwardly, he admitted that he knew how to defeat the archdemon, but everyone, including himself, was already running on fumes. He questioned whether abandoning them and saving only himself was truly the only option left. Sensing his hesitation, Glance reassured him that they still had one final trump card. Zeke questioned what they meant. At that moment, the 3 activated Unison Link. Zeke immediately recognized the advanced technique that synchronized and amplified their magical power. Even these weaklings could use it. If that was the case, there was still a way. Zeke rose to his feet and ordered the pathetic excuses for fighters to listen carefully. It looked as though they would need his power to pull this off after all. Mia looked at him with a puzzled expression. At that moment, Zeke activated his own Unison Link and forcibly inserted himself into their synchronization. Mia clenched her teeth as a sharp pain shot through her body from the sudden interference. Mark stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend that Zeke had forced his way into their synchronization. Glance watched with widened eyes, realizing that it had taken them years of relentless training to master Unison Link, yet Zeke had barged into it with ease. Zeke merely smirked, convinced that a technique manageable for these morons could never be beyond him. With that, he declared that it was time to turn the tables. Zeke recalled that every archdemon was a master combatant. Even so, its 4 nearly impenetrable shields had withstood every ultimate technique they had unleashed. Just when it seemed they had reached a dead end, the very fact that none of their attacks had worked became the clue they needed to break through. Realizing this, Zeke urged everyone to launch their counterattack. Glance cautioned that, even with their magic power amplified by Unison Link, there was no way of knowing how far their combined strength would carry them. He reminded Zeke that, if the situation worsened, he had to use the transfer orb and escape. Zeke replied that he had already heard him and told him to stop repeating himself. Wearing a confident expression, he declared that they would not need an escape route like that. Inwardly, he concluded that the power granted by Unison Link should make it possible. Marks then summoned the Flame Emperor Phoenix. In an instant, the massive phoenix charged straight toward the archdemon as she commanded it to reduce everything to ashes. Gradually, the shield surrounding the archdemon began to melt. Zeke watched in astonishment as he realized the shield had actually started melting. The first shield had finally been destroyed. Internally, Zeke confirmed that everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The shields possessed a hidden gimmick. They could not be broken unless struck by 2 or more attackers at precisely the same moment. Unison Link did more than simply multiply their magical power many times over. It concentrated the strength of all 4 participants into a single attack. Mia announced that 3 shields still remained and declared that it was her turn. Without wasting a moment, she charged directly toward the archdemon. At the same time, the demon raised its hand, preparing to attack. Zeke immediately warned Mia of the incoming strike. She answered at once, refusing to let him underestimate her. Empowered as she was now, she believed an attack of that level would not even touch her. Zeke watched in shock as Mia moved with incredible speed. He wondered if this was another effect of Unison Link. Using her incredible speed, Mia rushed forward and struck the archdemon with counter-art, sword quake, instantly shattering another shield. Marx's face lit up with excitement as she celebrated their success. Only 2 shields remained. Zeke snapped his fingers and pointed out that, the moment the shield had broken, they had finally managed to inflict damage on the archdemon, although it was only slight. Even so, with only 2 shields left, everyone's fighting spirit surged. Mia called out to Glance. Wearing a confident smirk, he let out a loud roar as his body swelled with power upon activating the all-attributed muscle magic, Paragon of Might. Raising both arms, he leaped high into the air and lunged straight at the archdemon, striking it with Sacred Sage, Evil Subjugation. The shield shattered instantly on impact. After landing, Glance watched as the archdemon touched the spot where it had been struck. Zeke smirked to himself, knowing that only 1 shield remained. Glance then called out to Zeke, wishing fortune upon his arms. Zeke scoffed and told the sage to simply watch him. Inwardly, he realized that, after linking with the other 3 through Unison Link, he could feel an unbelievable surge of magical power coursing through him. He concentrated all of that power into his sword before unleashing Shatter, Icicle Impact. The blade struck the final shield, instantly breaking it into countless pieces. Seeing every shield destroyed, Mia and the others cheered in excitement. With the archdemon's defenses finally gone, Zeke declared that it was time to destroy its main body. Just as he prepared to attack, however, his sword suddenly shattered apart. Zeke inwardly cursed the timing. At the same moment, a burst of light gathered in the archdemon's hand before firing directly toward him. Marx attempted to activate defensive magic, but Mia immediately realized they would never make it in time. The attack struck Zeke head-on, triggering a massive explosion. When the thick smoke finally cleared, Zeke had completely disappeared from where he had been standing. The others stared in disbelief, wondering whether he had taken the attack directly. Glance immediately dismissed the thought, realizing that their 4-way Unison Link remained intact. At that moment, Zeke's voice rang out, ordering the old hags not to break the link. The archdemon turned in surprise and discovered Zeke standing completely unharmed behind it. Mia could hardly believe that he had warped behind the enemy in an instant. Glance immediately recalled the relic he had entrusted to Zeke and realized that he had used the transfer orb. Zeke then declared that he would be taking the sword. Without hesitation, he drew the Ice God sword. In the next instant, he lunged forward and unleashed Cositus rising upon the archdemon. A violent shockwave erupted from the strike as brilliant light burst outward, defeating the archdemon instantly. Afterward, the 4 successfully emerged from the dungeon. Mia admitted that she still could not believe Lord Zeke had defeated the legendary archdemon and acknowledged how impressive it was. She casually wrapped an arm around his shoulder while teasing him. Zeke immediately protested, telling her to get away from him because she was annoying, even questioning whether she wanted to be cut down. Marx simply chuckled as she watched the exchange. A short while later, Glance spoke to Zeke and advised him to learn to rely on others. He explained that, when walking the darkest paths, it was important to have someone who could light the way ahead, and that having such a person by his side would allow him to become even stronger. Hearing those sincere words, Zeke recalled that the original Zeke from the game would never have formed a Unison Link with anyone else. Glance's advice echoed repeatedly in his mind as he contemplated the idea of having someone to light the way. At that moment, a strange voice suddenly echoed inside his head, addressing him as the descendant of Lagias bound by an oath. Sensing that something was wrong, Glance asked whether anything was troubling him. Zeke remained silent, realizing that the voice was speaking directly into his mind. Once again, the mysterious voice echoed within him, declaring that it would bestow power upon him. At that moment, Zeke finally realized where the voice was coming from and turned his gaze toward the Ice God sword. After that event, a few years passed. Somewhere in the forest, Luke informed Zeke that the beast had gone that way. Now 15 years old, Zeke Lagias replied that he did not need Luke to tell him. He quickly spotted the beast and noted that it had reached a dead end. The beast immediately charged at him. Zeke smirked as it finally chose to fight. In the next instant, its sharp horn pierced straight through his body, yet he remained completely unharmed. The beast hesitated in confusion. Zeke mockingly questioned where it was looking. At that moment, his body slowly dissolved into ice before shattering apart. The beast immediately turned around in search of his real body. Scoffing, Zeke remarked that, despite being called a legendary beast, it had still fallen for a simple ice illusion. In the blink of an eye, he severed the beast's horn. Afterward, he allowed it to escape. Luke picked up the horn and approached Zeke, commenting that he was actually a softie after all. Luke Hartmann, who was also now 15 years old, held up the horn and pointed out that Zeke had cut it off so cleanly that the unicorn had not even been injured. Zeke responded in confusion, explaining that the horn had been the only objective, making the beast's flesh nothing more than a hindrance. Luke winked and insisted that this only proved his point. Letting such a rare magical beast go free showed that Lord Zeke was full of compassion, despite having the worst attitude imaginable. Zeke concluded that Luke must have gone insane. Luke, Blink's son, was the boy he had once saved from magic sclerosis, and over the past 3 years he had become far too attached to him. Although Zeke considered Luke a pain in the neck, his real concern lay elsewhere. As he looked at his reflection, he saw a skull clinging to his body. At that moment, he realized that the death flags were still active. Ever since obtaining the demon's sword in the dungeon, many things had changed. Back then, when he first realized the sword was speaking to him, Zeke had been stunned. The sword had introduced itself as the demon's sword of Lagias, bound by a covenant to the last descendant of the Lagias bloodline. On the journey back, Zeke's thoughts had been consumed by the sword's words. He had never encountered any weapon called the demon's sword of Lagias in the game, nor did he understand what it meant by a covenant. The sword had then revealed that he was being forced to become Zeke Lagias. Hearing that had left him dumbfounded. Somehow, the sword knew who he really was. He realized it was because, no matter what he did, his actions were automatically twisted into the cruel words and deeds of the original Zeke Lagias. Frustrated, he cursed inwardly, unable even to say the truth aloud. The sword had spoken again, warning him that, if things continued this way, he would die. Zeke had been shocked. According to the game, Zeke was indeed destined to die, but that was exactly why he had worked so hard to change the story. He had trained relentlessly, learned swordsmanship from a knight, and even avoided the conflict with Glance. By all accounts, he should have been handling everything perfectly. The sword, however, had explained that his current state made that outcome unavoidable because his memories were incomplete. Zeke had been bewildered by the mention of missing memories. The sword revealed that those memories had been sealed away because they were inconvenient to someone playing the role of Zeke Lagias. Zeke immediately froze. He wondered if it was referring to his destiny of being defeated by the protagonist and the role he was meant to fulfill within the game. If so, that meant his missing memories were. Before he could reach a conclusion, the sword declared that it would grant him power. Addressing him as the last of the Lagias bloodline, it bestowed upon him the underworld eyes that perceived death and urged him to defy his fate. Agonizing pain immediately surged through his eyes. As they continued their journey, Mia remarked that it had been a long break. Marks jokingly wondered if it had been for a number 2, prompting Glance to comment on how crude the night was. While their conversation continued, Zeke sank back into thought, wondering what the sword truly was. It had since fallen silent, but he questioned whether it had actually existed in the game and what kind of ability these underworld eyes that perceived death possessed. The moment Zeke looked at the others, he was shocked to see skeletons clinging to their bodies. He froze in place, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Gradually, a realization dawned on him. The ability to perceive death could not possibly be some kind of reaper, yet if that were true, he could not understand why everyone else seemed completely unable to see it. Without wasting a moment, Zeke urgently ordered everyone to stop and not move another inch. Mia, Marks, and Glance immediately halted and turned toward him in confusion. At that exact moment, a landslide crashed down onto the path they had been about to take. The 3 reacted in disbelief, wondering whether it had been caused by the damage they had inflicted on the dungeon. Mia looked at Zeke and praised his sharp observation. Glance acknowledged that Zeke had saved them, and Marks added that his intuition was incredible. Meanwhile, Zeke noticed that the Reaper-like presence clinging to them had disappeared. He wondered if it had vanished because they had avoided death. Back in the present, Zeke reflected that, ever since he had been granted the eyes that could perceive death flags, the demon sword of Lagias had remained silent. He still had no idea which part of his memories was missing, but there was only one thing he could do. He simply had to keep avoiding the death flags. Besides, situations like this usually led to clearing a hidden objective without realizing it, which would then unlock lost memories. It was standard procedure, so he figured everything would probably work out. Just then, Luke interrupted and asked whether Zeke had been lost in thought. As Zeke turned to look at him, a realization suddenly struck him. Luke might be an important character as well. Zeke concluded that he needed to recover his missing memories as quickly as possible. Some time later, they arrived at the Adventurers Guild. The receptionist reacted in amazement upon seeing the unicorn horn, remarking that even catching a glimpse of a unicorn was said to be nearly impossible. Zeke simply replied that he never accepted requests he could not complete. The old man flinched at the remark. Luke urged Zeke not to be so intimidating before smiling warmly at the receptionist and explaining that Zeke was often misunderstood because of his sharp tongue, even though he was more righteous than anyone Luke knew. The old man remained unconvinced but admitted that, in a way, Zeke treated everyone equally. Zeke was mildly surprised that Luke had actually managed to make the old man say that. A staff member then approached and informed them that a new client had specifically requested the two of them by name. Luke confirmed that they truly meant them, and the staff member explained that the client had asked for the duo whose recent exploits had been so remarkable. The client was already waiting in the back room. The two immediately headed upstairs. Luke remarked that it was their first time receiving a request by name. Zeke reflected that, over the past 3 years, he had worked as an adventurer, taking on subjugation quests to earn his own money while gaining combat experience. For some reason, Luke had started accompanying him, and they had effectively become a duo. Luke commented that it was unusual, guessing that once the client learned they belonged to the infamous House Lagias, the request would probably be cancelled. Zeke shot back by asking whether Luke wanted to spend the rest of his life bedridden. Luke immediately admitted that he had only been joking. Inwardly, Zeke acknowledged that he had been wondering the same thing. Perhaps the client had hired them solely because of their accomplishments, but he still questioned what kind of person would request them specifically. When they entered the room, a woman wearing a cloak thanked them for coming. The moment she removed her hood, Zeke froze in shock. He immediately recognized her as Ciel Astella, one of the protagonist's future party members. More importantly, he saw the skeleton clinging behind her. It was another death flag. The room fell into silence. Ciel was the first to break it by calmly introducing herself as Ciel Astella. Luke reacted in shock upon realizing she belonged to House Astella and possessed silver hair. Zeke reflected that, in this world, silver hair was proof of royal blood within the kingdom of Diabole. When only part of a person's hair was silver, it merely indicated royal lineage. However, when every strand was silver, it signified one of the most gifted members of the royal family. Luke immediately knelt to pay his respects. Seeing that Zeke remained standing, he quietly urged him to show proper respect, pointing out that even a commoner understood the significance of silver hair. Zeke merely sighed, dismissing the matter. Since she had summoned them, he saw no reason to humble himself. He arrogantly sat down on the couch and remarked that anyone asking a favor should mind their attitude. Luke was horrified, realizing that such behavior could amount to a capital offense. Ciel, however, simply chuckled and remarked that the rumors about Zeke seemed to be true. Deciding to be equally direct, she revealed the purpose of her request. An unknown plague was spreading through a regional city. They suspected it might be magic sclerosis, but the disease had appeared in an unprecedented form, leaving them unable to confirm it. Hearing this, Zeke was startled, recognizing magic sclerosis as the same illness that had once afflicted Luke. Ciel explained that she wanted Zeke and Luke to help identify the disease and treat those affected. She had heard that the two of them possessed considerable knowledge in that area. Inwardly, Zeke admitted that he had personally developed the cure and even knew its formula. He had made the Adventurers Guild swear to keep both the formula and his involvement secret. Realizing this, he acknowledged that Ciel was far from being a sheltered princess. Luke was about to respond when Zeke immediately refused the request. Luke stared at him in disbelief. Zeke declared that the matter had nothing to do with him and that they should resolve it themselves. Inwardly, he could not believe the situation. There was no way he intended to travel alongside someone burdened with so many death flags to a city overrun by a deadly plague. Ciel remained completely unfazed. She remarked that his refusal had been entirely predictable, then informed him that, if he declined the request, both of their adventurer licenses would be revoked. Zeke was left speechless by the threat, sarcastically reflecting on how well-mannered she was. Smiling sweetly, Ciel replied that she was simply learning from the style of House Lagias. Zeke inwardly reflected that Ciel had been portrayed as the saintly heroine in the game, yet here she was using her authority to investigate people and issue threats. Making an enemy of her at that moment would only create more problems. Gritting his teeth, he reluctantly accepted the request. Ciel responded that she had known he would. Soon afterward, they departed for the city. While traveling in the carriage, Ciel thanked them once again for graciously accepting her request. Zeke immediately pointed out that there had been nothing gracious about it since she had threatened them. Luke interrupted, insisting that Zeke was actually very kind and that he believed Zeke would have accepted in the end regardless. Zeke silently rejected that notion. Ciel asked if that was truly the case. Luke cheerfully explained that Zeke had been the one who saved his life. Ciel smiled as she observed that the two of them seemed to share a remarkably strong bond. Luke shyly scratched his head before adding that, despite Zeke's terrible manners and the fact that everyone hated him, he had still saved him. Hearing that, Zeke questioned whether that was any way to speak about his own savior. Luke replied that Zeke should strive to become a respectable person like Lady Seal. Somewhat surprised, Seal asked whether Luke truly respected her. Luke enthusiastically confirmed it, explaining that someone willing to save the people embodied exactly what a true noble should be. Seal then revealed the truth about herself. Although she possessed royal blood, she was an illegitimate child. Even so, because she had been born with completely silver hair, her royal lineage was undeniable. For that reason, House Estella had taken her in, though she was far from being well liked within the family. Luke awkwardly admitted that he had never known any of that. Meanwhile, Zeke recalled that there had been lore about her background. Seal continued by explaining that she hoped to one day become worthy of her silver hair, the mark of royalty, and become a noble whom everyone could take pride in. To achieve that goal, she was prepared to do whatever it took. Luke looked at Seal in amazement, finding her aspirations admirable and remarking that she was nothing like Zeke. Zeke responded with a glare, while Seal merely giggled. Not long afterward, they arrived at Apian, a regional city in the western Etran territory of the Kingdom of Diabole. The moment Zeke laid eyes on the city, he was stunned. Death flags were appearing everywhere he looked. Suddenly, a desperate cry rang out nearby as someone begged for help after her husband collapsed. Seal immediately realized there was another suspected case of magic sclerosis and urged Zeke to help. Without hesitation, Zeke examined the man's condition. Afterward, Luke lifted the unconscious man and carried him toward the hospital, while Zeke remained behind. Later, at the epidemic patient quarantine facility, Luke was shocked by the overwhelming number of patients. Even the caregivers were visibly exhausted. Noticing that Zeke was nowhere to be seen, Seal wondered where he had gone. The knight accompanying her questioned whether Zeke had run away. Luke immediately rejected the accusation, insisting that even Zeke would not do such a thing. Before he could finish, Zeke arrived and observed that the situation was in a terrible state. Luke demanded to know where he had been. Ignoring the question, Zeke approached Seal and requested to speak with her alone. Surprised, Seal wondered whether he had discovered something. Zeke produced an object wrapped in cloth and explained that the situation had not felt like a disease, so he had searched the city by himself. He revealed that he had found the object buried in the center of town. Seal's eyes widened as she recognized it as a cursed object. Zeke concluded that the strange phenomenon afflicting the city was not magic sclerosis but a curse. He then questioned why Seal had not sensed the curse's presence. Seal admitted that she had felt nothing. Hearing that, Zeke recalled that, in the game, Seal had been a first-rate practitioner of divine art. She possessed extraordinary healing abilities and the power to purify any curse. Yet the Seal before him could not even sense a curse. He concluded that she was still in her pre-awakened state. At present, she possessed none of those powers. Realizing this, Zeke concluded that they would have to solve the problem without relying on divine art. Soon afterward, they informed the people of their findings. The crowd reacted in disbelief upon learning that the illness was actually caused by a cursed object. Confusion quickly spread as people questioned who could have done such a thing and why. Another cursed the situation, finally understanding why healing magic had proven ineffective. Someone then asked Seal whether there was any way to counter the curse. When Seal admitted that they had not yet found a solution, the people angrily protested that they had already reached their limit. At that moment, the crowd noticed Zeke and instinctively recoiled. Zeke slammed his fist into the wall, leaving a visible mark and instantly silencing everyone. He dismissed them as foolish peasants, remarking that they had only just discovered the truth and should try using their own heads for once. The people who had been shouting immediately fell silent. Just then, someone suggested that, if a curse was truly responsible, Lady Seal should surely be able to resolve it. An elderly man, recognized by those nearby as the facility director, brought up the legend of the silver-haired maiden. He explained that it was a famous tale throughout the kingdom. Long ago, when disaster befell a city, a daughter of House Estella had offered herself to the gods and saved everyone. Ever since then, the silver-haired maiden had been revered as one who possessed the power to quell disasters. Another man confirmed that he had heard the legend before. Meanwhile, both Luke and Zeke grew uneasy as they realized where the conversation was leading. The facility director then pointed directly at Seal, declaring that they had a silver-haired maiden standing among them. At that exact moment, a sharp pain surged through Zeke's head. He suddenly realized that part of his missing memories had returned. He recalled that, during Seal's backstory episode in the game, being chosen as a sacrifice had been the event that awakened her powers as a practitioner of divine art. If that was the case, then even without his intervention, his thoughts abruptly stopped as he noticed the skeleton clinging to Seal growing even larger. Zeke immediately realized something was terribly wrong. If his memory was correct, then there was no reason for Seal's death flag to be growing even bigger. Upon hearing that information, the people desperately begged Seal to save them by becoming a sacrifice for everyone. Seeing this, Luke immediately called out to Zeke, urging him to help Seal. The crowd fell silent as Zeke finally spoke. He suggested that this was the perfect opportunity for her to prove her worth to the people. Reminding her that she had wanted to become a noble everyone could be proud of, he told her to think carefully about what she could do to achieve that goal. The people immediately voiced their agreement. After saying his piece, Zeke turned and left. Luke tried to call after him. Meanwhile, the knight urged Seal to make her decision, insisting that Zeke was right. Luke immediately objected, insisting that Zeke had not meant for her to become a sacrifice. The knight responded with a look of disdain. The facility director then informed Seal that she had until noon the following day to decide, reminding her that she alone could save the town. After everyone else had departed, Luke spoke to Seal. Although he admitted that Zeke's words had sounded cruel, he firmly believed that Zeke had never intended for her to sacrifice herself. Remembering Zeke's final words, Seal quietly came to agree with Luke. Later that night, filled with determination, Seal resolved to search for another solution herself. She decided to speak with the facility director once more about the alternative plan she had devised. Just then, she heard voices nearby. Wondering if they belonged to the attendants, she quietly approached and peered through a small opening, listening in on the conversation. The facility director asked whether the matter of the sacrifice was proceeding smoothly. The knight replied that Lady Seal had announced she would summon a practitioner of divine arts to heal the patients while she searched for the culprit. The director reacted in disbelief after everything he had done that day to stir up the people. As Seal listened, she recognized the speaker as the facility director. The knight told him not to panic. He planned to visit the ducal house the following morning as a messenger and claim that practitioners of divine arts were extremely rare and occupied elsewhere, making it impossible to dispatch one for at least 6 months. The director eagerly agreed, saying they could incite outrage by making everyone believe they could not possibly wait that long. The knight smirked and mocked Seal for placing her faith in the ducal house. He revealed that they would never help because the curse itself had been orchestrated by the ducal house to dispose of Seal as a sacrifice. Simply because she had been born with silver hair, a commoner's daughter had deluded herself into believing she could ever be accepted as a noble. Hearing the truth, Seal quietly walked away, deeply wounded. Tears streamed down her face as she questioned what she had been doing all this time. Meanwhile, the knight glanced toward the place where she had been secretly listening moments earlier, and both he and the facility director slowly smiled. Outside, Luke searched the area in a hurry. He resolved that he absolutely could not allow Lady Seal to become a sacrifice. If he could locate every cursed object responsible for the outbreak, he believed the crisis could be resolved. He was certain that Zeke was searching for them as well. Frustrated, Luke groaned after failing to find even a single cursed object. Meanwhile, a man watched Luke from the shadows before suddenly charging at him. Luke barely managed to block the attack in time. The man accused him of going around destroying his cursed object. Luke was initially confused by the accusation, but as the words sank in, he immediately realized that Zeke really had been searching for the cursed objects. Concluding that this man was the one responsible for the curse, Luke resolved not to let him escape. The man responded by ordering Luke to die. At that moment, strange tentacles spiraled around the man's dagger before extending toward Luke and quickly wrapping around his body. Luke was shocked as he realized that his body would not move. Moments later, he noticed that the problem was not that he could not move at all, but that his body was moving on its own. The man explained that it was brainwashing magic. Although Luke appeared to be a capable swordsman, he concluded that Luke was weak against magic. He then coldly ordered Luke to kill himself. Luke resisted with all his strength as his own hands moved against his will, slowly raising his sword toward his neck. Just before the blade could cut into him, Zeke suddenly appeared. In the next instant, massive ice spikes erupted from the ground, knocking Luke's sword away while simultaneously slicing through the tentacles wrapped around him. Luke stood frozen in shock for a moment. Meanwhile, Zeke mocked Luke for struggling against such pathetic weaklings and questioned how someone like him could call himself Zeke's partner. Relief immediately spread across Luke's face at the sight of Zeke. He quickly realized that he could move again. Zeke casually explained that he had severed the flow of magic. Hearing that, the man was utterly shocked that someone had actually cut off his magic. Luke complained that, if Zeke had intended to hunt down the cursed objects, he should have asked him to come along. Zeke dismissed him as a fool, explaining that curses were simply another form of magic. Since Luke could not even perceive the flow of magical energy, he would only have gotten in the way. Luke ignored the insult and smirked, declaring that it was time for their counterattack. The man scoffed, claiming that adding one more opponent made no difference against his dark magic. At that moment, the tentacles surged forward once again. Confidently, he declared that he would make the two of them kill each other. As his brainwashing magic took effect, Zeke and Luke began turning their weapons toward one another. In the very next instant, however, ice spikes erupted precisely where the man was standing, forcing him to barely evade the attack. Zeke remarked that the man's technique was crude and that such a level of magical control could hardly be called brainwashing. The man stood in stunned disbelief. Zeke continued by explaining that brainwashing was an extremely delicate form of magic. It might have been sufficient to control a simpleton like Luke, but it was completely ineffective against him. Refusing to give up, the man immediately launched another attack. Switching tactics, he used the physical dark magic dark gravel, pebbles of darkness. Instantly, countless dark projectiles flew toward Zeke and Luke. Luke calmly held his ground and effortlessly dodged every incoming pebble before closing the distance in an instant and striking the man with his sword. The man gasped in pain from the blow. Zeke casually remarked that he had forgotten to mention one thing. When it came to physical combat, Luke was every bit his equal. Zeke then pointed his sword at the man and demanded answers. He questioned why the curse had been spread and whether someone else was truly behind it. Before he could finish, a hand suddenly burst out from the man's mouth. Zeke and Luke froze in shock as they immediately recognized it as a summoning spell. A cursed demon emerged. Zeke immediately called out to Luke, realizing they could not defeat the creature by themselves. Inwardly, he recognized it as the worst possible opponent. This had originally been Seal's awakening event. The cursed demon could only be defeated by divine art. Meanwhile, Seal continued to cry silently. Inwardly, she berated herself for believing that, simply because she had been born with silver hair, a commoner like her could ever truly be accepted among the nobility. She recalled the talk of sacrificing the silver-haired maiden to break the curse and bitterly dismissed the idea that anyone would be grateful. They would only be relieved to finally be rid of her. At that moment, a loud explosion echoed in the distance. Seal immediately turned toward the source of the sound and saw flames and destruction erupting from within the city. Alarmed, she wondered what was happening. Meanwhile, at the sight of the explosion, Zeke launched ice spikes toward the cursed demon, but it blocked them effortlessly. Seeing this, Zeke cursed inwardly, confirming that nothing except holy arts could even scratch it. At best, they could only hold it back. The commotion drew the attention of nearby civilians, who gathered and asked in shock what was happening. Luke urgently warned them to get back because it was too dangerous. Without hesitation, the crowd fled in panic. Just then, Zeke noticed Seal running toward them and realized she must have heard the chaos. Luke was equally surprised by her arrival. Seal demanded to know what was going on. Luke explained that he and Zeke had tracked down the sorcerer and cornered him, but before he could continue, Seal interrupted in shock as she realized he was referring to the one responsible for the curse. Luke confirmed that the man had used a summoning spell to bring forth a cursed demon. At that moment, the cursed demon detected their location. Luke urgently told Seal to run, explaining that nothing besides holy arts would work against it. As Zeke stepped forward, he reflected that Seal was currently powerless against such a monster. However, a crisis of this scale might become the catalyst that awakened her talent for holy art. Regardless, she remained their only hope of defeating the creature. The cursed demon's tentacles suddenly lashed toward Luke and the others. Panic spread among the civilians as the monster closed in. Zeke quickly cast Ice Wall, shielding everyone from the attack. He then turned toward the civilians, harshly telling them they were only getting in the way and ordering the useless small fry to leave. Luke and Seal immediately helped the injured civilians escape, urging them to get up and run. Before long, everyone reached the facility and took shelter inside. Breathing heavily, Seal expressed her gratitude to Zeke, believing they were safe because of him. Suddenly, a man interrupted and claimed that the opposite was true. Confused, Seal listened as he argued that the demon had only appeared after Zeke arrived. Another accused Zeke of being a walking curse. Hearing those accusations, Seal was stunned by what the people were saying. Just then, Zeke entered the facility and remarked that this was where everyone had been hiding. The men who had been complaining immediately fell silent. Relieved to see him, Seal called out to him. Zeke informed everyone that he had managed to hold the cursed demon back, but it would not be for much longer. He then turned to Seal and asked whether she felt any change within herself. Confused, Seal admitted that she did not understand what he meant. Nearby, several men whispered among themselves, complaining that, since Zeke was a mage, he should stop standing around and kill the monster already. Seal reacted in disbelief at their remarks. Meanwhile, Zeke grew increasingly concerned. Seal's power should have awakened by now. Something was still missing. There had to be one final key. Inwardly cursing, he realized that the entire city was covered by a death flag. Then Zeke noticed something. As he stared intently at the cursed demon, he saw a crack running across its chest. At that very moment, a thunderous noise erupted. Zeke immediately turned toward the source and saw that the cursed demon had already broken free from his ice magic. Clicking his tongue in frustration, he realized the ice wall had been destroyed. Just then, one of the civilians declared that he could not take it anymore. He called out to Zeke and the others, pointing out that they were supposed to be strong and demanding that they hurry up and deal with the monster. Hearing this, Seal became upset. She reminded the people that these individuals were risking their lives for everyone, yet this was all they had to say. Zeke cast a cold glance toward the people behind him and dismissed their complaints as worthless noise. Seal was surprised by his composure. Zeke remarked that a noble's duty was not to coddle the masses. He would rather be the one to whip those pigs into line, because he could not care less what they thought. Those words left Seal stunned. Nearby, an old man angrily demanded to know what Zeke had just said. At that moment, Seal finally understood. She realized that, despite telling herself she wanted to save the people, she had ultimately cared more about how they viewed her. In other words, if she would not be praised for saving them, it had almost felt as though there was no point in doing so at all. That was not the kind of noble she had aspired to become. With renewed resolve, Seal called for Luke and declared that they would abandon the city. Luke was stunned. Seal instructed him to lead the evacuation of the citizens. Hesitating, Luke asked about her. Seal replied that she had made her decision. She would remain behind and face the monster herself. At the very least, she could buy enough time for everyone else to escape. Her silver hair stood out even in the darkness, so if she acted as a decoy while Sir Zeke held the cursed demon back, the people would be able to evacuate more safely. The people were astonished by her courageous resolve. Meanwhile, Zeke fell silent. Suddenly, the sword spoke to him once more. He immediately recognized the voice as that of the magic sword of Lagia's. The sword revealed something that caused Zeke's eyes to widen. Without warning, Zeke pulled Seal close. Surprised, she questioned what he was doing. Zeke simply declared that this was the final key before thrusting his sword toward Seal's chest. Luke was stunned and immediately rushed toward her. All at once, Seal's chest began to glow with brilliant light, and a pair of wings emerged behind her. She slowly floated into the air, radiating divine light as everyone watched in stunned amazement. Zeke explained that someone had sealed away Seal's power. Using the magic sword of Lagia's, he was able to destroy the seal without harming her body, though accomplishing it required extraordinarily delicate control over his magic. Hearing that, Seal recalled how Zeke had once severed the flow of magic. Suspended high above the city, Seal spread her arms wide as a holy rain poured from the heavens. The shimmering rain fell across the entire city. The people looked upward in disbelief, wondering whether it was silver rain. Moments later, someone gasped as they realized their illness had vanished. Another person exclaimed that they felt even healthier than before they had ever become sick. The cursed demon was also struck by the holy rain. Its body slowly burned away as it roared in agony. Luke watched in surprise as the monster gradually disappeared. At that exact moment, the death flag looming over the city shattered as well. Seeing this, Zeke quietly realized that the crack on the cursed demon's chest had been the clue all along. He then told Luke to watch carefully and declared that this was the dawn of the legend of the Silver Saint. The next day, when Seal opened her eyes, she found herself lying in a bed. The people nearby immediately noticed that she was awake and expressed their relief that she was safe. Confused, Seal asked where she was and what had happened. At that moment, her memories returned and she quickly sat upright. She immediately asked about the city and what had happened to the demon. The people happily explained that she had been the one to defeat the demon by summoning a silver rain that washed away the curse. Seal was stunned to hear that she had really done it. A man added that all the patients who had fallen into comas had awakened, while another said that they owed everything to her. Seal admitted that she did not remember any of it. Suddenly, the man took her hands and hailed her as the Silver Saint, declaring that she was the legend of Apian. Overwhelmed by the situation, Seal insisted that she could not have accomplished everything by herself. At that moment, Seal remembered Zeke and immediately asked where he was. However, as soon as she stood up, dizziness overcame her. Someone quickly caught her and gently urged her not to overexert herself. When Seal looked behind her, she realized it was Luke. He explained that her condition was only natural after using such extraordinary divine magic. Seal called out to him and admitted that, because she remembered so little, none of it felt real. Luke replied that he would explain everything that had happened the previous night. Although there were still a few loose ends, Zeke was taking care of them. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a knight frantically rode on horseback as he fled the city. He cursed in disbelief that Seal had actually awakened her powers. She had purified not only the demon but the curse itself, despite him having been told she was a failure. Suddenly, a chill ran down his spine. In the next instant, ice spikes burst from the ground, forcing his horse to stop abruptly and throwing him violently to the ground. Zeke calmly stepped into view and remarked that the knight seemed to be in quite a hurry, wondering where he was running off to. The knight immediately broke into a cold sweat upon seeing him and demanded to know what he was doing there. Nervously, the knight questioned whether Zeke had actually believed Seal's story. He hastily claimed that everything he had said about the ducal house orchestrating the curse had only been a joke. Zeke stepped closer and concluded that the ducal house had indeed been pulling the strings. With a smirk, he explained that he had simply noticed someone fleeing the city in a panic and had followed out of curiosity. Hearing that, the knight immediately fell silent. Later, back at Apian City Plaza, the knight stood encased in ice like a statue. When Seal arrived, she stared at the sight in shock. Zeke explained that the frozen man was the one responsible for carrying out the curse. He clarified that the knight was not the true mastermind, but merely the one who had executed the plan. Seal gasped in shock upon learning that he was the culprit. Zeke pointed to the tattoo on the knight's neck and asked whether she recognized it. Seal immediately denied recognizing it and asked whether it had any significance. Zeke dismissed her ignorance before explaining that the sorcerer who had summoned the demon bore the exact same tattoo. He had confirmed it on the corpse, leaving no room for doubt. Although they remained ignorant of the full truth, he was willing to bet that her half-brother knew something. He added that he now had the perfect gift to present to the ducal household, the frozen specimen before them. Luke reacted in disbelief, wondering if Zeke intended to march straight into the ducal house. Zeke dismissed the idea as ridiculous, explaining that this alone was far too weak to serve as evidence. Meanwhile, Luke quietly thought to himself that Zeke seemed exactly like the type of person who would do such a thing. Just then, Zeke turned to Seal and instructed her to deliver a message to her brother. If her brother had business with him, then he should come and face him himself. Zeke added that the request Seal's brother had sent through the Adventurers Association had merely been a pretense to investigate him and determine whether he was someone of value to the kingdom. He admitted that he had tried to avoid attracting attention by working as an ordinary adventurer, but that had only made him appear even more suspicious in the end. Hearing this, Seal reflected on Zeke's accomplishment. He had discovered a cure for magic sclerosis, wiped out the beast hordes on the northern plains, and delved into the Lagia's dungeon. She realized that he had made himself impossible to ignore, and that no one in a position of power could have failed to notice him. A smirk formed on Zeke's lips as he remarked that such awareness was exactly what he expected from House Astella, the kingdom's intelligence agency that operated from the shadows. Nearby, Luke reacted in shock at the revelation. Zeke fixed his gaze on Seal, addressed her as Agent Seal, and asked for her final verdict. Seal admitted that she had initially suspected Zeke of plotting something. However, seeing him risk his life to protect everyone had shown her the very image of the ideal noble she had always longed to become. She declared that this was the truth she intended to report. Even so, she acknowledged that she herself was also being tested by the ducal house and could not be certain they would even listen to her. Zeke dismissed her concern with amusement. He pointed out that she was now the Silver Saint, a title that neither the kingdom nor her family could afford to ignore. Seal fell silent, her eyes filled with emotion, as Zeke observed how differently the people now treated her compared to before. He congratulated her, saying that she had finally become a true maiden of House Astella. Seal immediately rejected the notion, deciding that none of it mattered to her anymore because she had found her own path to follow. Zeke responded with a faint smile and accepted her decision before turning and leaving. As she watched him depart, Seal's expression hardened with determination and resolve. She silently vowed that she would follow the path Zeke walked as well. Later that night, at the Astella ducal household, the young lord slammed his fist down in anger. Furious, he raged over the wretched Seal, unable to believe that she had broken the seal he had placed upon her and awakened her divine magic. He had expected to dispose of her without lifting a finger, yet the entire incident had only proven her hidden talent. To make matters worse, Zeke Lagias, who had aided her, knew about their role as the kingdom's intelligence agency. The young lord questioned whether the Lord of Lagias had truly been the incompetent and corrupt fool everyone believed, or whether it had all been an elaborate disguise. The butler immediately rejected that conclusion, reasoning that it was more natural to assume Zeke himself was the anomaly. He then asked the young lord, Actel, for his orders. The butler further reported that Zeke also appeared to be acquainted with Lord Glance. Upon hearing this, Actel Astella, Seal's half-brother, concluded that they should perhaps attempt to bring Zeke Lagias over to their side. Back at the mansion, Zeke looked at his parents and remarked that they both seemed exceptionally cheerful. Lord Lagias laughed heartily, attributing their good mood to Zeke, whose recent accomplishments had elevated the renown of House Lagias to new heights. His mother added that she could not have been happier. Zeke sighed to himself, thinking that he could not blame them for celebrating. The original Zeke from the game had no hope of ever improving his reputation. Yet everything he had achieved was merely a means to an end, the end where he died. Over the past 3 years, he had trained relentlessly to become stronger and had even become an adventurer, saving the city of Apian along the way. Under normal circumstances, his actions would have been twisted into acts of villainy. This time, however, things were different. Thanks to the Silver Saint, Seal, speaking on his behalf, his public image had genuinely improved. Even so, he had no idea how these changes would affect the future. Zeke noted that events beyond his knowledge of the game were already beginning to accumulate. He had saved 2 of the protagonist's companions, encountered a demon sword that had never appeared in the game, and awakened the netherworld eyes that foresaw death. On top of that, there was the mysterious organization operating behind the scenes in Apian. From that point onward, events might no longer follow the original script. Just then, a servant informed Zeke that they had guests. They were emissaries from the ducal house of Astella. Surprised, Zeke wondered if they were connected to Seal. At that moment, a familiar voice greeted him. He immediately recognized the visitors as Mia, the knight from the Glance survey team, and the mage Marks. Without hesitation, Mia explained that they had witnessed the capabilities of House Lagias and had come with a request for Zeke. Every few years, the lords from every region gathered in the royal capital for the Council of Lords, and they wished for Lord Zeke to serve as security during the event. Zeke was surprised to hear about the Council of Lords, and Mia reminded everyone that House Lagias would naturally be attending as well. Lord Lagias immediately refused, insisting that he could never expose his precious heir to such danger. Marks calmly responded that it was a pity because protecting the royal capital was an honor of great prestige. It would have been the perfect opportunity for the name of House Lagias to rise even higher. He added that the recommendation had come directly from Sage Glance himself, making it certain to become the talk of the kingdom. It would also allow the world to witness Lord Zeke's brilliance, though it was unfortunate that they would have to decline. Upon hearing this, Lord Lagias instantly changed his mind and declared that Zeke absolutely had to protect the royal capital. Zeke could hardly believe how quickly his father had reversed his decision. Lord Lagias enthusiastically announced that he would begin preparing for the conference and left the remaining details to the others before departing. After he was gone, Zeke turned to Mia and Marks and concluded that, since they had gone out of their way to recommend him, the request was related to the incident in Apian. Mia was impressed by his sharp insight. She revealed that they had still not uncovered the true identity or objective of the mysterious organization responsible for the curse in Apian. As long as their motives remained unknown, there was a high probability that they would target the conference. Zeke pointed out that the king himself would attend the opening ceremony, meaning they could not afford even a single mistake. Marks interrupted, explaining that although the recommendation from Lord Glance was genuine, the request also came from the ducal house of Astella. Hearing this, Zeke wondered whether it was Seal's doing or perhaps a scheme orchestrated by her half-brother. If it was the latter, then it could very well be a trap. Even so, refusing the request would likely cause even greater trouble. Accepting that he had little choice, Zeke concluded that every one of them was an utter imbecile. A moment later, something occurred to him. He reminded them that the enemy organization already knew his face, making the entire plan foolish. Mia smiled, admitting that they had expected him to raise that concern. Marks confidently assured him that they had come fully prepared. Confused, Zeke asked what he meant. Marks then opened a large briefcase, revealing an assortment of makeup and explaining that they intended to disguise him. Seeing this, Zeke immediately hesitated, but Mia reassured him that everything would be fine and urged him to relax and stop struggling while she worked. At the same time, by the lakeside, Van stood in silence, concentrating as he gripped his sword tightly. He opened his eyes, raised the blade overhead, and brought it down in a powerful swing that sent violent ripples racing across the water's surface. This was Van Freak, the protagonist of Wish Soul. At that moment, a tree approached him and remarked that he seemed especially fired up. Van recognized her and asked whether she had heard about the incident in Apian. The existence of such an incredible adventurer had left him unable to sit still. He also mentioned that she had been diligently training her magic. A tree confirmed that she had, explaining that she never wanted to return to that village. Hearing this, Van recalled how, when their trading company had stopped at Alhai village, he had been surprised when a tree suddenly ran up and asked to work for them. He reflected on how no one could have guessed she possessed such remarkable talent for magic. A tree responded with a giggle while quietly thinking to herself that, compared to that person, she still had a long way to go. Van then declared that he had no intention of remaining at his current level. No matter what, he would make a name for himself as a swordsman. Seeing his unwavering determination, a tree smiled. She then announced that it was time to move because the main caravan had already reached the royal capital. As she walked ahead, Van followed behind, thinking that the Council of Lords would surely present valuable business opportunities and perhaps even the beginning of an exciting adventure. Filled with enthusiasm, he declared that they were heading to the royal capital, while a tree cheered excitedly beside him. Later, at the royal capital of Spirito, the carriage passed through the city gates. Luke could not help but remark that, as expected of a city that had repelled countless monster invasions, it was enormous. He explained that the guards assigned to the conference first had to gather at the Adventurers Guild headquarters. Since many different organizations were involved, the guild served as neutral ground and was the most convenient meeting place. Soon, the carriage came to a stop. Luke stepped down first, noting that they had arrived at the designated location. He offered his hand to Zeke and reminded him to stay alert because they had no way of knowing where the enemy might be watching from. Out of habit, he respectfully addressed him as Lord Zeke, but quickly corrected himself and instead called him Lady Brynhilde. When Zeke stepped out of the carriage, Luke remarked in disbelief that it was astonishing how gender-swapping magic combined with a little makeup could transform him into such a beautiful woman. Zeke dismissed the comment, reasoning that the result was only natural given the high-quality foundation he had to work with. Luke observed that, despite the transformation, Zeke's personality had not changed in the slightest. Shortly after, they entered the Adventurers Guild headquarters. Luke was amazed that, as expected of the capital, the Adventurers Guild was huge. The moment they arrived, someone greeted them and indicated that they had been expecting him. Zeke gave Mia and Marks a brief greeting. Marks proudly informed Zeke that he had done the makeup exactly as she had taught him and praised how cute he looked. Annoyed, Zeke told them to know their place, calling them curses. Hearing this, the two broke into laughter. Mia pointed out that even his voice had changed. Luke remarked that it was impressive how Zeke did not even flinch when entrusted with such a major responsibility. Zeke casually explained that he was merely fulfilling a request. However, in his mind, he noted that there was one thing concerning him. Ever since he had accepted this job, it felt as if the death flags were laughing right at him. He wondered whether there was something in this city that posed a threat to him. When they reached the door, Mia opened it and addressed him as Lady Brynhilder, asking him to try not to cause any trouble. Upon entering, both Zeke and Luke were surprised to see Blink inside. Blink announced that it seemed everyone had gathered. He introduced himself as Blink Hartmann, representing the Night Order, and expressed his intention to work with them. Meanwhile, Zeke remembered that he had forgotten Blink had returned to the Order. Blink then explained to everyone that security would normally be handled by the Royal Guards and the Night Order's Magic Division. However, because the Lord's Council involved many VIPs, the mission required strict vigilance. The capital was vast, yet they were short-handed. For this operation, they were therefore borrowing the strength of the Church and the Adventurers Guild to divide and cover the patrol areas. He first asked each representative to introduce themselves. A man immediately stepped forward and introduced himself as Jorn Glynn of the Magic Division. Marks informed Zeke that Jorn had mastered multiple spells and was said to be a strong candidate for the next sage. Another man followed and introduced himself as Bard Penis from the Maria Church. Standing beside him was Aaron Isosar of the Royal Guard Division. A woman then stepped forward and introduced herself as Harriet Charged, an adventurer. Aaron reacted with surprise upon recognizing her as the representative of the A-rank party, Wings of Light. He mentioned having heard that the cursed child of Lagias had recently risen to a rank, which had brought the credibility of the ranking into question. With Harriet present, however, he believed they had nothing to worry about. Harriet casually mentioned Lagias, noting that although it should not have been possible, there were rumors that they had bought their adventurer rank with money. Even at their church, citizens of the Lagias territory often came seeking salvation. Aaron added that he had also heard the Lagias domain was in ruins. Hearing this, Zeke realized that this was it. He had recently begun wondering about it himself. The Lagias family was hated far too much. They had been treated like vipers in the game as well, but back when he was playing, he had not thought much of it. For people outside the territory to hate them this much, however, felt abnormal. Aaron then glanced at Zeke and asked whether she was also an adventurer. Zeke introduced herself as Brynhilder, an adventurer, and pointed to Luke beside her. Aaron repeated Luke's name, feeling that he had heard it somewhere before. Just then, Harriet muttered the name Brynhilder and stepped closer, saying that she had never seen her before. She stared at Zeke and commented on how beautiful she was. She then concluded that if she did not recognize Brynhilder, she must be below a rank. She questioned why someone with a pretty face but no skills was there. Hearing that, Zeke told himself that he could not afford to make a scene and needed to de-escalate the situation. However, what came out of his mouth was completely different. He stated that it seemed only trash obsessed over rank. Everyone gasped in disbelief. Zeke screamed internally in frustration upon realizing that his words were being converted to Zeke speak. Zeke then stated that she had simply been summoned because she was strong and questioned whether that was a problem. He added that if someone had to rely on a nameless adventurer, it must mean that they were both seen as incompetent. Aaron protested at what she had just said. Harriet challenged Brynhilder to prove herself if she was going to talk big. Aaron immediately suggested moving to the training grounds. The others furiously reacted to being looked down on by such a little brat and resolved to teach her a lesson. Seeing how quickly the situation had escalated, Luke tried to intervene, but Blink stopped him. He considered it a good opportunity to demonstrate her skills, since he had not been able to see how much she had grown since he returned to the Knights. Luke asked his father whether that was the reason he was letting this happen. Afterward, at the training grounds, the crowd reacted in shock as Zeke effortlessly defeated Harriet and her team. Zeke scoffed and questioned whether that was truly the extent of their abilities. Among the audience, someone gasped in disbelief that Wings of Light had been defeated so easily. Jorn remarked that they were supposed to be a ranked adventurers and should not have been so weak. He concluded that this only proved the girl was actually strong. Just then, someone interrupted, stating that it was only natural since she had come with his recommendation. Jorn gasped in surprise upon realizing that the person was Sage Glance. Hearing this, Aaron remarked that being recommended by the sage was a surprise. He stated that he was not fond of bullying the weak, but it seemed holding back would not be necessary. As the battle about to begin unfolded, Marx informed the others that Eren was the scion of the Isilur Marquis. Blink added that anyone aspiring to become a knight had surely heard of him, referring to him as the Lightning Knight. Eren raised his sword and declared that he was coming. In the blink of an eye, he struck at Zeke with incredible speed, and Zeke barely managed to block the attack. Seeing this, Luke gasped in shock at just how fast Eren was. Eren continued unleashing relentless sword strikes toward Zeke, but Zeke avoided every single one. Eren remarked that she had impressed him with how she dodged his attack. However, he added that his title of Lightning was not just for show. Eren then thrust his sword toward Zeke while casting Thrust Lightning, causing lightning to spiral violently around the blade. Zeke was internally surprised at the sight of lightning magic. In that case, before the spell could hit, Zeke immediately cast an ice spell, stopping Eren's attack in an instant. Watching this, Glance was amazed that Zeke had used a pointed block of ice to attract and redirect the lightning. Blink was equally impressed that Zeke had managed to make that judgment in such a short time frame. Meanwhile, Yorn disagreed, stating that, with all due respect, Brynhildr had already fallen into Eren's trap. At that same moment, Eren resumed his assault, launching one attack after another with Thunder Arrow, Elect Slash and Bolt Whip. Yet despite the barrage, Zeke effortlessly dodged every attack. Yorn commented that she was holding out well, but Eren's continuous high-speed attacks drained his enemy's defensive capabilities, and his magic processing speed was second to none. Yorn smirked and concluded that at this rate, it was only a matter of time. On the battlefield, Zeke once again blocked Eren's attack using an ice barrier spell. Eren immediately followed up with another strike, yet Zeke still managed to defend against it. Eren remarked in surprise that she had blocked that as well, but concluded that this seemed to be her limit. The moment he finished speaking, Eren unleashed a powerful burst of lightning that struck Zeke directly, causing her body to collapse motionless onto the ground. Eren admitted that he may have gone a little overboard and called someone to treat her wounds. However, the instant he looked back, Zeke was already standing only inches away from him. Zeke scoffed and questioned whether he had mistaken that ice statue for her. Eren froze in shock. He could not believe that she had matched his attack speed and even cast an ice illusion at the same time. She was faster than him. Before Eren could react, Zeke struck him with her sword, sending him crashing into the wall from the impact. Zeke smirked and remarked that it seemed the medic would not be wasted after all, instructing them to make sure he received proper treatment. The audience watched in amazement and admiration. Meanwhile, Glance burst into laughter while Yorn stood there in complete shock. Internally, Zeke noted that these guys were not the threat and guessed that he would go on patrol. As he scanned the lively town, Zeke observed that everything seemed peaceful enough. In his thoughts, he reasoned that the organization would not be making any bold moves right now. Anyway, he could just take it easy. Just then, a woman screamed that there was a thief and begged someone to stop him. Seeing this, Zeke internally remarked that public safety was trash regardless. He quickly spotted the thief and immediately gave chase. While running, Zeke complained internally that the outfit was not suited for chasing. At that moment, his body suddenly collided with someone. Van immediately apologized. Meanwhile, Zeke's eyes widened as he slowly recognized the boy. It could not be. It was Van. In Chapter 16, Zeke thought of the man before him as his natural enemy. He was Van, the protagonist, and the very cause of Zeke's death. Now disguised as Brynhildr, Zeke stood before him as he observed that she looked to be in a hurry. Van wondered if something was wrong. Zeke explained that she was chasing a purse snatcher and did not have time to deal with him. Since Van was the very cause of Zeke's death, interacting with him was absolutely out of the question. Van decided to give her a hand. He spotted a boy running with a woman's purse and immediately chased after him. The boy looked back and realized that Van was fast. Van caught him by the shirt, only to realize that he was just a kid. He wondered why the boy would resort to stealing. Zeke had ended up cooperating with his nemesis. He wondered if the burning death flag he had seen earlier had been a warning of his encounter with Van. The boy told Van to shut up and not boss him around, even calling him a damn old geezer. Van became angry at being called old. Zeke felt that something was off. Technically, he had not even met Van yet in the game's timeline. Zeke noticed something and grabbed the boy, staring at his necklace. He took the necklace and threw it onto the floor, then destroyed the pendant. He wondered where the boy had gotten it. The boy explained that he had gotten it from someone. Van was confused. Zeke revealed that the necklace had a self-destruct spell cast on it. Van was shocked, while the boy thought Zeke was lying. Zeke could tell from the flow of magic, however, and he had seen a burning death flag directly behind the boy. The moment he destroyed the pendant, the death flag vanished. Suddenly, someone shouted. A girl appeared and questioned what they were doing to a child. The boy called her Big Sis Ellis. Zeke wondered who she was. The girl explained that she was the kid's acquaintance and objected to violence against a child who was around 15 years old. Zeke pointed out that the child was a purse snatcher. Ellis became angry and pulled the boy's hair, remarking that he had gotten into trouble again. The boy apologized and explained that some old guy had told him that if he stole some bags, the old man would give him a huge allowance. Zeke asked who the man was, but the boy said he did not know him. He only knew that the old man had a lot of money. Zeke concluded that the old man was the one who had given the boy the pendant. He had felt a similar magical signature from that self-destruct pendant before and wondered if that organization was involved again. Ellis thanked Zeke and apologized for not knowing the situation, realizing that he had actually saved the boy's life. She then properly introduced herself as Ellis. Zeke explained that it had happened by chance, so she did not need to apologize. He only asked her to keep a closer eye on the boy. Pink-haired Ellis was someone Zeke did not recognize. She did not seem to be a main character from the game. Ellis held Zeke's hand and told him that although he had a sharp tongue, he was actually a really good person. She praised him for saving the boy without demanding any gratitude and for seeming so refined and modest. Zeke was confused by her assessment. Ellis asked for his name and indicated that if Zeke did not tell her, she would call him her honey instead. Zeke answered that her name was Brynhilde. He thought Ellis was far too pushy. Ellis decided to call her Hilda. Hilda felt that Ellis's vibe was similar to someone else's. Hilda told the boy to return the purse properly. She doubted that their paths would cross again. Ellis called after Hilda and realized that she was going to search for the man who had given the boy the pendant. Ellis decided to help as well, explaining that she knew the area like the back of her hand. Hilda refused. Van suddenly decided to come along too. Hilda thought that the protagonist and the villain had ended up in a co-op event. Van explained that he was actually pretty strong and an aspiring adventurer, and that he had been useful earlier. This storyline had not existed in the game. Hilda wondered whether they were beginning to deviate significantly from the original scenario. She decided to let them come along. To her, the protagonist was the embodiment of death itself. She would have preferred to keep her distance, but she decided to take it as an opportunity instead. She would assess Van's capabilities and, depending on the situation, kill him later on. Later, they found the man. Ellis asked whether Hilda was sure, and Hilda confirmed that the location was where the kid had been recruited. The magical aura she felt from the man matched the residual wavelength from the pendant. Van decided to leave the matter to him. Ellis warned him to wait, pointing out that they did not even know what the man was capable of. Ellis used magic, surrounding herself with a fire aura. It was an enchantment that would not hurt him. Van was surprised by it. The man was fast. He spotted Van and wondered who he was. Hilda realized that Ellis was using the fire to accelerate like a jet engine. She had not known that an enchantment could do that. She wondered whether Ellis was merely a background NPC. Van attacked with a fire kick. The man was sent flying and identified Van as the guard's dog. He then held his pendant. Hilda was shocked. A massive energy like a ball surrounded the man. Ellis realized that something was wrong because the man intended to self-destruct. Van realized that they had to stop him. Ellis could feel enough magical energy to blow away a city block. Hilda told them to stop screaming and called them amateurs. She drew her sword and ordered them to get out of the way. They tried to stop her because it was too dangerous and the spell had already been initiated. She would not make it in time. Hilda held her sword. She intended to freeze the entire spell formula and then she used magic. The massive ball of energy froze. They were amazed that she had stopped a spell that had already activated. Hilda explained that she had simply jammed her own mana into the irregularities of the spell's flow. It was especially easy with sloppy, item-dependent magic like that. If they aimed for the weak points, it was not difficult. Hilda saw a tattoo on the man's chest. As she had suspected, it was them again. Van asked Hilda whether she was okay. Suddenly, corpses appeared on Van and Ellis's back. It was a death flag. Hilda ran, but then stopped. She looked surprised. It was a death march, and the crisis surpassed even the scale of the previous royal capital destruction. After that, Yorn was shocked to learn that there had been a suicide bombing, though Hilda had managed to stop it. Ellis explained that they were the witnesses and that there must be others who had been given those explosive pendants. If they did not act immediately, there would be massive casualties. Hilda recognized that they had no time to waste and asked whether anyone was skilled at interrogation. Bart explained that it was a state of emergency and that they would use the Maria Church's secret truth serum. He made the man drink the serum and questioned whether he was acting alone. The man revealed that he had plenty of comrades and that they already knew he had been captured. In less than an hour, the coordinated bombings would begin. Everyone was shocked, while Hilda became annoyed. She demanded to know where his accomplices were and where the children who handed out the pendants were. The man answered that he did not keep track of every little detail, but he did know that the total number of pendants was 100. Van realized that they had destroyed 2, leaving 98. Yorn wondered whether they could really stop all of them in under an hour. They would have to split up and search. Hilda stopped him, warning that scattering their guards would mean playing directly into the enemy's hands. Everyone was shocked by her conclusion. Even in Apian, they had made it appear as though their goal was to destroy the city, while their true objective had been to use Seal as a sacrifice. If that was the case, these bombings were a diversion. Their real intention was to thin out the defenses so they could go after their actual target. The man confirmed that she had figured it out. Bart was annoyed, while Aaron pointed out that the man would not know anything anyway. As a suicide bomber, there was no way they would have entrusted him with the actual plan. Hilda realized that they hardly needed to ask what the enemy's objective was. The man wearing the hat wondered what they were after, and Hilda regarded them as idiots for gathering everyone there. Aaron identified the gathering as the Lord's Summit, making the royal family and the nobility their targets. The three men were surprised. Jorn wondered whether they should simply ignore the bombings in order to protect the royals. Hilda regarded them as fools and stated that she could handle that much on her own. She would locate and destroy the remaining pendant. Everyone thought that was completely impossible. Suddenly, Lord Sage stated that he believed in her, trusting that she would not make such a claim without proof. Lord Blink then urged the others to trust her as well. Hilda had no time to stand around arguing. They needed to deal with the mess outside and follow her orders. The three men fell silent. In the church, Hilda used the scope she had borrowed from that narrow-eyed magician, and it worked surprisingly well. The man wearing the hat was Jorn. With Ellis's support magic, they had nothing to fear. Hilda warned Ellis not to get carried away. Ellis used chargeness, which could even enhance Hilda's own magic. Hilda wondered whether Ellis was really just a side character. She could not afford to trust anyone right now because there was a mole on their side. It was exactly what she would do, and it was the most effective strategy for an operation like this, since they did not know who belonged to the organization. Hilda made sure the Royal Guard was composed solely of people she knew were not enemies. First came the Glance Survey team, Luke and Blink and Van, since he had defeated the bomber. The protagonist and his party were guaranteed allies. As for the rest of the people scattered across the city and maintaining security, they were characters Hilda barely remembered. Keeping them suspiciously far away was the safest option. She also forbade the adventurer party Wings of Light from acting independently. It was the best she could do for now. Hilda told Ellis that she had done a good job. Ellis used Ice Aura, and Hilda realized that it was buff magic. Ellis matched her ice affinity, causing Hilda's magic to overflow. People were wearing the pendants. Hilda realized that everyone holding one had a blazing death flag floating over their head. She attacked, using ice bullets to pierce through the enemies. The enemies' pendants were destroyed. Hilda counted the pendants as she destroyed them. In the end, she destroyed all 98 pendants and announced it to the others. Ellis was amazed. Hilda considered Ellis annoying. In the royal capital, there was actually a similar sniping event in the game. It had not been Zeke's event, but she would make use of her knowledge by using the tower overlooking the city and the special scope item required for the event. Hilda told Ellis to stop spacing out because they needed to hurry. She also warned her not to get cocky just because she had been a little useful. The real threat was coming next. Suddenly, an explosion occurred behind Ellis. Hilda was confused because they should have prevented all the explosions. Ellis wondered what was happening as the smoke became terribly thick. Ellis asked Hilda to use the scope. Hilda realized that it was not an explosion but monsters, an entire swarm of them. She thought it was impossible. They were in the middle of the royal capital, and she wondered where they could have even come from. Ellis pointed something out. Summoning circles covered the city. Now that Hilda thought about it, they had used summoning magic in Apian as well. She ordered the royal guard to deal with the monsters and evacuate the civilians outside the capital. They ran inside, but they were suddenly stopped by an invisible wall. According to the Magic Division's analysis, there was a problem. A barrier had been erected over the entire capital, completely sealing off the city. Hilda was annoyed. She had crushed their opening move, yet they had instantly countered with a multi-pronged attack. She wondered whether this had always been part of their plan. Her thoughts returned to the tattooed organization and what exactly its end goal was. Hilda called Ellis and explained that their real target was still the royal palace. They needed to get moving and carve a path through. She would not let things go according to plan. In Chapter 18, monsters had been summoned in droves across the entire capital. To make matters worse, a massive barrier had been erected to prevent any escape. Jorn explained that a spell of this magnitude would require more mana than their entire magic division combined. He wondered whether it was a magic item. Someone called for Jorn and informed him that the civilians trapped inside the capital were descending into total panic. The people believed they were being left to die and demanded to be taken out of the capital. They were on the verge of a full-blown riot. The man wondered whether there was any chance of breaking the barrier. Jorn explained that it was impossible for anyone other than him, at least. However, it would take some time. The man asked whether Jorn could speed it up somehow. Jorn explained that there was only one way. He would have to withdraw from the defense line and focus entirely on dismantling the barrier. This would place a heavier burden on the rest of them, but he was counting on them. The man understood. Jorn thought that they were an eccentric bunch, but he had no choice but to trust them. In the town, Ellis guided Hilda along the way. There was a shortcut to the palace. Hilda was surprised to see the slums, a district where orphans and criminals congregated, and also the literal dumping grounds of the royal capital. It was a place completely forgotten by the world. Suddenly, someone shouted. Hilda and Ellis were shocked when someone screamed. Ellis ran toward the sound, thinking that someone had been left behind. Hilda stopped her. Ellis was confused. Hilda told her not to bother and that no one needed saving. They needed to hurry to the palace. Ellis was confused by Hilda's response. Hilda had not seen a single death flag in the vicinity, which meant that whoever was in there was not someone about to die. Ellis wondered whether Hilda was saying that it did not matter what happened to those in the slums. She knew their duty was to protect the nobility, but she wondered who was going to protect those of lower status. Ellis stared at Hilda and concluded that she had clearly lived a sheltered life. There were plenty of nobles who did not view the poor as fellow human beings, but Ellis did not think Hilda was one of them. Ellis ran toward the house. Hilda tried to stop her. Ellis entered the house and asked whether whoever had screamed was all right. She was surprised to discover that a bird appeared to be the one screaming. She was shocked to realize that it was a mimic bird imitating a human voice. She immediately looked toward the exit, but monsters appeared outside. There were monsters outside. Ellis realized that she had been lured inside. She could handle a few goblins on her own. She used chargeness and wind aura, using wind magic to boost her speed before striking. She attacked the monsters. Later, Ellis was still standing while monsters continued to pour in. She realized that something was wrong. She had taken down so many monsters, yet their numbers were not dropping. More and more monsters continued to appear. They were coming through holes in the wall. Ellis noticed a light and wondered whether there was a summoning circle hidden inside. A monster attacked Ellis. She was knocked down and her clothes were torn off. The bird appeared in front of her and released an attack. Ellis screamed. Suddenly, an attack struck the bird. Hilda appeared while holding her sword. Ellis called out to Hilda. Hilda told her not to bother. Ellis had rushed in blindly based on a complete misunderstanding. Ellis apologized and warned Hilda not to let her guard down. The monsters continued spawning, and there was a magic circle nearby. Hilda explained that it was no longer an issue. She had brought along someone quite useful. Ellis was confused. The monsters tried to attack Hilda. Suddenly, someone broke through the window and defeated a large number of monsters. He was swift as a gale, a flash of light, a single stroke of violet thunder, and a raging storm. Faster and more beautiful than any other, he was the man they called the Lightning Knight. She introduced him as the Lightning Scrub. It was Aaron Isosar. Aaron had been busy running around and destroying the magic circles throughout the capital. He had sensed a surge of mana coming from the area and rushed over, only to cross paths with Hilda. He had already neutralized the magic circle behind the wall, and dispelling magic happened to be his specialty. Ellis thanked him. Aaron told Ellis to save her thanks for Lady Hilda. Since she was the one who had bested him, he could hardly refuse her request. Hilda's final blow had made him fall in love with her at the speed of light. They needed to make haste to the palace. As for destroying the remaining magic circles across the capital, Aaron would handle that. Hilda told him that he talked a big game and should not disappoint her. Hilda and Ellis ran outside. Ellis stared at Hilda. Hilda thought that with the magic circles being dealt with, they only had to worry about reaching the palace. Sage Glance and the other heavy hitters were gathered there, so they should be able to buy them enough time. In the royal palace, the place was in chaos because of the monsters. Sage was attacked and fell to the floor. All of the soldiers were heavily injured. Luke thought that even Zeke would not be able to defeat this monster. Luke thought the monster's strength was beyond everything they had ever faced. They were all injured. A dragon appeared and roared at them. It began forming an attack, and everyone realized that the situation was bad. The dragon unleashed a massive burst of fire, but the flames were extinguished by an ice bulwark. Hilda appeared and realized that they had run into such an enemy. Luke recognized Lady Brynhilde. Hilda knew that blocking a single strike from the dragon was the absolute best they could do. The Tyrant Dragon was an epic-tier boss monster even within the game. According to its lore, a single one was capable of wiping out an entire small city. Its real threat was its breath attack from above, which unleashed massive area of effect damage from long range. Normally, such an enemy required an entire army and a full-scale raid battle. However, with the royal capital completely engulfed in chaos, they could not count on any reinforcements. Hilda urged everyone to listen to her and place their lives in her hand. With her game knowledge, they were going to take down that winged lizard. She called for Ellis to hit them with an enchantment. Ellis understood, and the others were amazed as they felt power surging through them. Hilda ordered the mages to ground the dragon. Sage and Marks cast a magic spirit of the wind and attacked the dragon. It began losing altitude. Tyrant dragons were mindless beasts. If their strategy worked, they actually had a chance to clear this. Hilda called Mia and Blink and ordered them to draw its aggro. She then ordered Van to target the wings. The main damage dealer was the swordsman with the highest attack stat. Suddenly, the dragon spoke and called them naive. It told Hilda that petty schemes were entirely useless. Everyone was shocked that the dragon could speak. The dragon revealed that it had heard every word of her trite little strategy and regarded it as weak and utterly foolish. Hilda was surprised that the dragon possessed such high intelligence. She realized that it was not a standard tyrant dragon but a unique variant. Unique variants had substantially higher base stats, meaning the game's standard raid mechanics would not work against it. Blink attacked the dragon, but the dragon destroyed his sword. It regarded them as imprudent people. Luke did not give up. Hilda realized that she could not give up either. She used Frostbind and caught the dragon. They had already entrusted their lives to her, which meant there was only one thing left to do. Hilda would shatter the giant death flag. The dragon used an anti-magic reflection, knocking everyone out. It attacked them, slamming them into the wall. Hilda thought about the magic reflection. She could not believe that the dragon could even cast high-tier ancient magic. The dragon refused to leave them alive in the hands of lowly scum like them. Everything was exactly as it had predicted. Hilda thought about the person behind the attack and questioned whether the dragon was connected to the mastermind. The dragon replied that it was of no concern to the dying and ordered them to burn to ashes. The dragon unleashed another massive burst of fire. Hilda's body would not move anymore. Suddenly, someone spoke to Hilda and addressed her as the descendant of Lagias. The presence asked whether she desired power, and a sword appeared. It was the demon sword of Lagias. The dragon declared that it was now Hilda's end. Suddenly, someone attacked the dragon. The demon sword appeared. Hilda emerged with horns on her head and wings on her back, holding the demon sword. Sage wondered about the sinister mana. The dragon questioned Hilda about her form. Hilda attacked the dragon. The dragon unleashed another massive burst of fire, but Hilda cleaved through the dragon's breath attack. She then struck the dragon's body. The dragon could not believe it had never been told about this. It wondered about the source of that power and whether Hilda could be someone else. The dragon disappeared, defeated. Hilda fainted and fell. Luke caught her before she hit the ground. Luke called him Zeke and urged him to stay with him. They needed healing, and he needed to get Lady Seal. Hilda woke up and realized that the death flag was growing.